Hi, I'm Pav.
And I'm Neil.
And welcome to the Top 10 of Anything podcast.
Let's start the countdown.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
As far as British comedy legends go, Eric, Morecambe and Ernie Wise are hard to beat. From British theatres, BBC TV, ITV, and even movies, Eric and Ernie have made people laugh for decades and will do for decades more. Here's Neil with his short, fat, hairy legs and 10 Morecambe and Wise facts.
Thank you very much, Pav. So, Morecambe and Wise started as a double act in 1941.
Hellfire, it's a sailor of the century.
Early in their career, Eric performed as Ern's straight man for a short time.
Oh, what an incredible pair.
In 2013, the two were honoured with a blue plaque at Teddington Studios, where their last four series of the Morecambe and Wise show were recorded.
Hey, it's no good doing that, mate. If you want season tickets to watch Luton Town, you've got to pay like everybody else.
Ernie made the first UK mobile phone call on the 1st of January 1985.
That's it. I'm going to let it all hang out. Why not? It'll get a big laugh. Right.
The 1977 Morecambe and Wise Christmas special attracted around 28 million viewers, nearly half the population at that time.
It's not nice to make fun of people who wear spectacles.
In 1976, Morecambe and Wise were both awarded the OBE.
Straight your wig and go home, you.
The complete set of tapes for their first series, Running Wild, no longer exists. The BBC are currently looking for any off-air or private copies. Can you help?
A surprise.
She comes off, whips them off, and his two fellas. No.
In 2005, the Monster Raving Loony Party's manifesto stated that they would change the national anthem to Bring Me Sunshine. They said it is quicker, more tuneful, and people know the words.
Have you all got your fingers ready?
Ernie shares his birthday with a plethora of famous people, including Jimi Hendrix, Bruce Lee. Eric shares his birthday with Bobby Darin and George Lucas.
Where'd that come from?
Off me chest.
And in 2006, the public voted the duo at number 2 in the TV show The UK's 50 Greatest Stars.
No, it isn't.
But don't blow too hard.
Well, there we go. There we go. What a cracking start. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to do the Morecambe and Wise sketches. Now, 55% of our listenership are from the US, are from overseas. So this is going to be a little bit more of an education for you. And I do stress you should go and try and watch as much Morecambe and Wise as you possibly can. And we couldn't think of anyone better. Well, actually, this was this gentleman's idea to do this. Hopefully there's not been any trouble with his wife on his decisions on this one. But Kevin Day is back again. Hello, Kevin. Lovely to have you with us.
It's a privilege to be asked back onto such a wonderful podcast.
Bless your heart.
Oh, making me blush.
Yeah. So this was your idea. You came to us with Morecambe and Wise sketches. I'm taking that you are obviously a fan. I think pretty much anyone who's British of a certain age would be and likes comedy would be a fan of Morecambe and Wise. Where do you put them in the league table of comedy stars?
For me, the top, the very top. It's interesting. I'll say hello to your American listeners. I didn't realise we had so many US listeners. They never quite broke the States. Ed Sullivan, who was probably the greatest TV star in the world in the 60s, was a huge fan of Eric and Ernie. He had them on 11 times, flew them over. And they wouldn't work with an American writer, so they worked, but only all right. So they're quite uncomfortable watching for anybody who loves Eric and Ernie, because the audience don't quite get some of the parochial references, but they love the slapstick. And Eric said one of the only good things to come out of his heart attack was that Ernie gave up on Breaking America, because Ernie was obsessed with Breaking America, and Eric was perfectly happy with making people laugh here. But for me, you kind of get a false memory syndrome, don't you? And I get asked to do a lot of stuff, a lot of talking head stuff about comedy, and they ask me to tell us how you felt when you watched Dave Allen as a kid, or how he Morecambe was. And I don't remember. I don't know. remember laughing at Benny Hill because my dad laughed at Benny Hill, but I didn't know I was going to be a comedian at the time, so I wasn't making notes about stuff. If I was watching Morecambe and Wise then, and I was probably reading comics and doing something else while I was doing it. But it's when I became a professional comedian that I went back to revisit comedy history, became obsessed with it, and it's then that Dave Allen's probably my comedy hero, but it's very different to Morecambe and Wise. I would put Eric and Ernie, and I'm sure we'll discuss this, vintage Eddie Braben, Eric and Ernie, if you like. For me, probably number one. And I think one of the myths we need to dispel about Morecambe and Wise is that they were good, clean, wholesome family entertainers, which they were in a way, but they were also filthy. Some of you, and it's only when you look back as an adult and some of my favourite rude jokes come from Eric and Ernie. Just simple ones like there's a sketch where Eric says to Ernie, Eric puts the phone down, and Ernie says, "Who was that?" And Eric says, "Oh, it's just some big Hollywood director wanted to get hold of you, Alfred." And Ernie goes, "Hitchcock?" And he says, "It's hard to tell on the phone." There's another sketch where Eric plans to saw Peter Cushing in half to stop him nagging them for the money that he owes them. And Ernie comes on and says, "What's this?" And he said, "It's a box for sawing a woman in half." And Eric says to Ernie, "Do you want to get in it?" And Ernie says, "I'm not a woman." And Eric says, "I haven't started sawing yet." But also my favorite rude joke. And at the time, not many people would have got it. One of the brilliant things that Eddie Braben did was reinvent Eric and Ernie and gave them characters, if you like, rather than just straight man, funny man. And he made Ernie quite pompous and a snob. And there's a lot of sketches in which Ernie talks about how his Christmases were better than so. And there's this one particular sketch when they were talking about the fact that Ernie's parents were quite posh and they had an art collection, and they mentioned a couple of pieces of art. And Ernie says, "My mother had a whistler," and Eric says, "There's a novelty," which is a fantastic joke. It's only, I'm sure, at the age of 10, I wouldn't have. But and they were getting away with this stuff all the time. The amount of times they used the word "it" were when Ernie would say, "Do you want a closer look at it?" And Eric would say, "Have we got time?" And it's just they were wholesome, but they also came from this musical background. They both obsessed with musical, despite what people like Jacob Rees-Mogg might like to have you think, or the Daily Mail might. Musical was filth.
Yeah,
musical was working class comedy for working class people who knew exactly how people's bodies worked. And so Eric came from that. Eric and Ernie came from that tradition. So for me, in terms of inventiveness, in terms of playfulness, in terms of wordplay, in terms of timing, in terms of all the things that make brilliant comedians or double acts, they were without doubt number one for me. They were the top. And even now, researching this, and again, I've got a bone to pick with you because I thought the Disney songs one was difficult.
Yeah.
The only thing that's annoyed my mind is like even last night we're recording this the day after Dominic Cummings' incredible expletive-laden evidence of the inquiry, which in any other week I'd have been. But even last night, Ali's going, "Can we watch News at 10? We've got to see Dominic Cummings swear." It's like, no, I've got more Morecambe and Wise sketches to watch. I've got a top 10 Morecambe and Wise moments to get through. So yeah, for me, I don't think there's anyone to touch them. And there's a moment that we'll talk about, which I think is probably the high watermark in British comedy. I think for me, without a doubt, probably the funniest 3 minutes of British TV comedy there's ever been. I have to say.
Yeah.
But I found it hard to remember as well, a lot of the sketches, because they did so much, didn't they? And when we came to it, that's what I found hard to get my top 10 around, is I thought, my God, I can't quite place which sketch is in which. You remember bits, and then I went on the YouTube rabbit hole.
Classic lines, and you remember classic lines and think, "Oh, what sketch was that in?" Or it might have been in a longer, bigger bit of them, where they're in bed together or they're living together. It's a whole sketch of like that.
But it was a nice rabbit hole to go back down and watch them all again and just see ones. I mean, I've got a sketch on there, well, a couple that I'd completely forgotten about, and I thought I'm going to have to add them because they really made me belly laugh.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it's why I wanted to suggest Morecambe and Wise moments rather than
Mm.
sketches and like. And
Yeah.
but the beauty of the sketch, there's no comedy that you look back on with fond memories. It's never ever as funny as you thought it was, except Morecambe and Wise is close to that because the sketches are so long. Again, we'll talk about that, but their hit rate in sketches, there's at least 2 or 3 lines in every sketch, which is just as astonishing. It's a great hit rate, and those jokes, as we'll discuss, those lines justify the sketch in themselves. Yeah, but the fact is as well that especially when they started working with Eddie Braben, they had such a structure to their show that if you just did the sketches, you deny yourself the pleasure of so much stuff. All the front of curtain stuff they did, all the stuff with taking the piss out of these world famous people.
Yeah.
Just the little tiny sketches they did together. Some of the songs. You deny yourself. That is why I went for moments rather than sketches. Although, of course, some of the sketches are the real highlights, basically.
I also think I completely agree with you, Kevin. Before we actually came on air, Neil and I was talking about looking back and about the fact that you think about Morecambe and Wise, especially the Christmas specials and the age we were. We were kids, and so those kind of it moments, like you spoke about, would go over our heads, but we would laugh about the funny dances or doing funny things and the slapstick, if you like.
Yeah, and the costumes and yeah,
and it's not necessarily rose tinted spectacles, but looking through the mists of time when you look back on them, it's like you realize, right, that's why that bit was funny, because there's actually a bit of a sexual innuendo there that we didn't even. It wouldn't have even occurred to us being 7, 8, 9.
Yeah.
And in my mind, for 15, 16, 18, 20, I would never have come into my mind.
Well, it's funny because Lenny Henry presented a show a couple of years back, which was basically an excuse to put together some Morecambe and Wise sketches. But Gary Morecambe, Eric's son, was the guest on this each, so they spoke to him and they got some of the people back. So Glenda Jackson came back to talk about. But Lenny Henry made this brilliant point. He said the reason he loved Morecambe and Wise so much was because he remembered the sound of his parents laughing.
Yeah.
And he said it was one of the few times, because, he grew up black in Dudley in the West Midlands in the 60s and 70s, a time of quite stress for black people, let's be fair. And he said it's one of the few times that all his family would be together. It sounds like a cliche, but and he would laugh because his mum and dad were laughing. But he knew that they were laughing at something slightly riskier that he hadn't got. So it's only when you go back and watch it again, as you just said there, Pat, it's like you go, oh yes, I see what they were doing there, the rascals. Exactly. And also, it's only because I became and still am obsessed with the history of British comedy that I got so many of the references, because they're always throwing in references to old musical acts or to old musical things or to. And it's at the time, I don't think my mum and dad would have got those references, but they just entertain themselves. They would refer to people who were long forgotten, a ventriloquist that was long forgotten, and you could just hear a couple of camera people laughing, or maybe 1 or 2 really old people in the audience, or the classic, the classic Andre Previn thing with the orchestra.
Yeah.
When Eric first sees the orchestra, Eric says, "Which one's the fixer?" Which gets nothing from the live audience, but the band just crease up, because most bands in the 30s, 40s, and 50s were put together by somebody who got 10 bob more for putting the band. He was the fixer. So the orchestra, these people, these posh, even this posh LSO London Symphony Orchestra classical musicians got the reference. So there's all of that. They're really proud of British comedy history, and that comes through. And I think that also reflects in why they didn't ever really break America. And they did the 2 films to try and break America. But even in the films, the humor is quite parochial. It is. You can understand why American audience. I mean, now you would tell them to Google it, but at the time you can understand why they didn't quite get these 2 slightly older looking men, because they were all. You forget how young they actually were, but they looked older, as everybody did. So there was a lot. And as I say, Ernie really wanted, because when Eric first met Ernie was referred to as the Mickey Rooney of England. Mickey Rooney was this huge, obviously huge US film star.
Yeah.
But Ernie was really famous when he met Eric. Ernie was 13, I think. He said it was back in 1941, and Ernie was a well-known hoofer. He was called the Pocket Rocket or something along those lines. And Eric was this gormless comic character. And as you say in the introduction, initially they decided to try and make Eric the straight one. It just didn't work. So Ernie kind of gave up a potential Hollywood career to do Morecambe and Wise for 40 years, but there was always that bit of him that wanted to break American. There was always a slight guilt from Eric that he never got the chance to do that. I mean, they were seen by millions of people in the Ed Sullivan Show, and it was quite clear that Ed Sullivan loved them, but Ed Sullivan used to see them here. So Ed Sullivan would see them at the Palladium and was convinced it would work over there, but they never quite did. But for me, that doesn't matter, really.
No.
In a way, I think we would have lost something if they did become big international stars. For me, it's a long-winded introduction. I know we haven't started. This happened before, didn't it? So we've got to be away by 9 o'clock. Look what's happening. Sorry.
But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, go on, Neil, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say, the one other thing is you can really see influences of their comedy sort of today, or let's say sort of post, sort of after Morecambe and Wise. And we were talking, especially Vic Reeves.
Absolutely.
The more I've watched it now, I mean, I always thought it, but the more I watched it now, I'm thinking, Vic Reeves. Vic Reeves.
Well, even Reeves and Mortimer, they do a pastiche of the whole Morecambe and Wise.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Vic played Eric's dad in a really good sort of drama documentary that Victoria.
That's right, he did.
Victoria Wood starred as a mum. So Vic and Bob. Bob's the funny one in Vic and Bob, and let's say the one you'd rather have a drink with. But Vic is obsessed. I mean, Vic was openly very honest about his admiration for Vic and Bob and for Morecambe and Wise, and Vic and Bob both wanted to copy that dynamic when there wasn't necessarily a feed man and a funny man.
No.
Which there wasn't in the later part of, in the BBC Eric and Ernie, it was very much a double act when they both got laughs. Whereas in the early ITV stuff, which we'll discuss, they were very much more old fashioned double act. But we'll come on to that.
Yes, indeed. Let's crack on then. So we've got 10 to run down. Kevin, what is your number 10?
Well, you've had a line from it in Neil's history there, basically, with Have You Got Your Fingers Ready? Because it's a sketch, it's a top of the form sketch from 1970. And the reason I've chosen this is I've tried to choose, I think everybody listening to this, especially your UK listeners, I think we'll probably all have 3 or 4 moments that we agree on.
Yes.
But I wanted to try and pick some that showed some of the slightly unusual, quirky stuff, some of the stuff that Vic and Bob particularly picked up on. And there was a show in the 60s called Top of the Form, which I know I didn't watch it as a kid because it was posh. It was on BBC Two. and basically it was 2 teams of posh kids in posh school uniform asking questions. It was like a university challenge, but for sort of grammar school kids. So they do this spoof, Eric and Ernie. So Ernie's asking the questions, and Eric is on the boys' team. So you've got a team of girls and a team of boys, all of whom I would say are in their mid-30s, quite clearly 2 middle-aged actors. So they'll play, and basically the cleverness of it is that Eric can't get his buzzer to work. He knows the answers, but he just can't get his buzzer to work. So all the other kids are getting in, answering these questions, and he just gets more and more crossed. And at one stage, he just shouts, "I don't know if this button's not working, if my finger's fused," which is a line that Vic and Bob would have been absolutely proud of. But the choreography of it, of the lights coming on and his light not coming on, and then it comes on when he doesn't press it, and he tries to get his finger to it, and it goes off. And that's all very clever, and there's some very funny lines in it. And Eric gets exasperated, which he does very well. He does exasperation very well. But the twist at the end, which is great, which is why I wanted to include it, is that Ernie says, "Right, the last question, it's all on this. the winning team gets 2 weeks in Mallorca, right? Which is a very unusual concept anyway. That for a quiz for 14-year-olds, the winners get, and the girls' team end up winning. And the girls' team are sort of and Ernie, as the host, says, "Well, what a shame that the boys won't be going to Mallorca." And Eric says, "You speak for yourself." And he gets up and he's wearing a short skirt and white socks, and turns his head round and he's got a ponytail on the back, a pigtail on the back of his wig, which he's managed to hide all the way through. So he just is. It's a very British musical ending. That I'm going with the girls. I am a girl. It comes out of nowhere, but it indicates. Like most comedians of the 60s and 70s, you didn't have to work hard to get them to dress as women anyway.
No.
But it comes out of nowhere because there's no indication that that's going to be the ending. And it's not their best sketch by any means, but it's got some cracking funny lines in it. But I just wanted to include it as one that indicates the thought that went into the punchline, if you like, that it's quite a long journey, but the picnic at the end is absolutely worth it.
Yeah. Bit of ahead of its time as well.
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I did see that one there. I mean, I obviously haven't got it on my top 10, but I agree with what you mean. It's like it's a Vic and Bob. If Vic and Bob came up with a sketch of that in 95 or 98 or something like that, you wouldn't have been out of place at all.
Not at all. You could just see Bob Mortimer getting up from behind the desk.
Yes.
In a short girl's skirt. Basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
You forget the fact that it's actually slightly sinister that a man's going on holiday with 3 schoolgirls to Mallorca, but it doesn't matter because it's the way Eric delivers it as well. Because Eric wins, which is great. It's funny, but as I say, I just wanted to include it as because it's not a sketch that a lot of people would know.
No. And what I will say is that for our Patreon subscribers, we will, on the video playlist, I will try and put every sketch that we talk about. But one thing about YouTube is that they haven't got a lot of stuff of Morecambe and Wise, especially a lot of some of the ones that you can just think of from the top of your head.
Well, do you know what? I was quite surprised by that because it's one of the reasons it took me a lot longer to research this than I thought, because I imagined that somewhere on Sky TV, somewhere on the playlist or somewhere on YouTube, every one of these sketches would be available. And I was surprised. There's one we'll come on to later on, which I couldn't find at all in its entirety. And I was really frustrated because I was looking forward to sitting down and watching it. And I had a couple of those. There's little snatches of some of them, and I don't know if these are copyright issues or what have you. But even on iPlayer, I thought, surely BBC will have a huge selection of Eric Morecambe and Ernie Wise stuff, but no, and it was much more difficult than the Disney song ones we did before, where there was nothing that wasn't available.
Exactly. Very strange. Very strange.
Yeah, and as you say, there's nothing of their first original Running Wild, the 50s BBC series, which was a disaster. And it's quite possible that Eric and Ernie themselves made sure there was nothing available. But in those days, the BBC didn't keep tapes; they reused them. They recorded over them. I think there's 2 of the BBC series from 1970 are missing. But strangely enough, you can get more of the ITV series on YouTube, the one in the 60s, 2 of a kind, than you can of the BBC stuff. Which I was really surprised by, because I mean, there's not 1 minute of Dad's Army, for example, that you can't watch.
No,
all the 2 Ronnie's classic sketches are there for availability, but for the Morecambe and Wise stuff, not a lot.
Yeah, very strange. Those tapes are probably in a vault somewhere with the Star Wars Holiday Special. Probably where they are.
Again with the Star Wars Holiday Special.
Indeed. That's what we want to do. Top 10 moments of the Star Wars Holiday Special. There you go. Go on then, Neil. You're number 10.
I can't even get through it. Yes, so the same as Kevin. I went down watching something and sort of refreshed my mind with a lot of Morecambe and Wise. Couldn't remember a lot of it or remember snippets. So while I was watching the YouTube, I came across a Jungle Book sketch, which links us into our last podcast.
Yeah.
But if you remember this, it's basically Eric and Ernie miming to the King Louis song.
Yeah,
I want to be like you.
yeah.
I want to be like you, which isn't particularly funny, although you do realise what a good dancer Ernie was
Yeah,
in that sketch. He really is a good dancer. But
Yeah.
it's when Eric comes out as Baloo that gave me such giggles, unpleasant giggles that I haven't had in a long time, where I was proper belly laughing when Eric was dancing. Now, I always laugh at I can't remember their names now, the guys that used to do the sandbox dance, the Egyptian.
Wilson, Betty, and Keppel.
Yeah, always.
Who are referred to in the Glenda Jackson and Anthony and Cleopatra sketch.
Yeah, exactly.
They do that stand dance. Yeah,
may talk about it later on.
Yeah.
But always find those laughing. But Eric is dancing as Baloo did a lot of those sort of movements, the shuffles, the bits. But it had me in stitches, and I thought, if it's done that, and a lot of the other sketches I pre-watched hadn't made me laugh as much as that, I thought I'm going to have to put it in. So that's why I put it in my top 10.
I think one of the reasons, and it's a cliche, but when my son Ed, who's now a comedian, Ed Knight, was 4, 5, 6, he loved Morecambe and Wise. He still does. And I've talked. It's partly the joy. You can just see how happy Eric is performing. When Eric saw that costume, I imagine his eyes lit up. But also, you can see Ernie. So many times he's trying not to laugh. But Ernie just looks really proud.
Yeah,
that they're making people laugh. And there are lots of moments like that. I mean, there was one sketch I was thinking about. I think it was the very first sketch that Ernie Braben wrote when he went to the BBC, which was a Robin Hood sketch, Robin Hood and Little Ern, which again is all right. It's not a bad sketch, but there's just one moment in it when the sheriff of Nottingham has caught them in the castle and is telling Richard the Lionheart that he's going to kill him and they're all going to die, and he's got his guards with him, and Eric just turns around and clocks the camera and just starts looking at the camera. He ignores the actor playing the sheriff, just looks at the camera, and then Ernie spots the camera and he just turns around and they're just smiling at the camera. Yeah. And then Francis Matthews, Richard, he just starts, and eventually they're all just, and then a couple of extras come in and they're all just looking at the camera. And because Eric loved that sort of breaking the fourth wall stuff. Eric loved acknowledging that they were talking to people. And there are little moments like that, which, it's not the best sketch, but those little moments. And then you watch it and you just go, I don't know why I'm laughing at this, but it's just funny. And Eric, and they do a Sylvester and Tweety Pie sketch as well, which is just, it's just funny with it sitting on the swing. It's just, and him dressed as Blue, it's like you say, it's not the best, but it's you just smile anyway. You just get swept up with it. Yeah.
But it's the joy that I got from it as well, I think, that made me put it down. I don't know why. It was, like you said, it wasn't really well done sketch. They're only miming. Although I really was impressed with Ernie's dancing in that one.
Yeah, well, Eric's not a bad dancer either, but Ernie was a really, really good dancer, and you see that they do quite a lot of song and dance numbers, top hat and tail stuff, and they partly because they enjoyed doing it so much. Yeah.
But that's the music hall part of it, isn't it? That's
very much so. Yeah.
Yeah. The one thing I was when I was looking through all the different clips that I could actually sort of get my hands on. Whenever I look at anything from the 70s and maybe the 80s, it always looks dated, and you always have that little bit of a cringe. And you think, wheel tappers and shunters, and velvet jackets and massive collars. And I always look at it and I always think, oh God, everything looks brown and beige and never seems to be sunny in the 70s for some reason. But I never get that feeling with Morecambe and Wise. It always feels timeless, even though they're doing something which is like directly from music hall. They're just dancing, they're tap dancing in front of you, and you're supposed to take that as entertainment. But it never ever feels dated. I never feel that icky sort of 70s feel that I do when I'm watching, well, whatever it would be, even if it's like Cannon and Ball or something like that, another double act. You think, oh God, that feels so 1980s. Whereas for them, it just seems timeless.
I think that's a really good point. And we'll come on to this. If you look at some of the 60s stuff, the early 60s stuff on ITV, that is dated. They're a very different couple then, and some of the stuff they talk, it grates. They talk about paddies. There's a sketch they do when they're dressed as leprechauns in terrible Irish accents, and there's this terribly misjudged IRA gag in there. And it's like, but they changed when they went to the BBC. But so I think that's partly due to Eddie Braben. I think their attitude to women was so different to other acts' attitudes to women, because the amount of huge female stars they had on, and they would take the mickey out of their status a little bit.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah.
essentially, the women always got the last word. This woman called Anne Hamilton, who was in most of their sketches, who they clearly adore. And you've got these two characters, whereas in the ITV series, they're quite lechy. They talk about birds a lot in the ITV series, where in the BBC series, you think these two blokes have never talked to a woman in their life. They're really innocent. They're really innocent and childlike. And there's a sort of Laurel and Hardy feel to them that you kind of, you can't be alienated by them. And I think it's an odd thing to say, but I think because they were so rooted in 40 years of musical comedy, that kind of does the opposite of dating them in a way. You'd think, because I'm going to mention this in a minute. I find watching the two Ronnies hard now. I have to say, there's a lot of
talking about that,
especially in their later stuff, when there's a lot of, they recreated the famous Four Candle sketch in their last series, but as an Asian shopkeeper and an Irish navvy buying stuff, and it's not good. And they had that terrible, dreadful mini series when women ruled the world. It's called The Worm That Turned, and they had the men's liberation front. Whereas I think you're absolutely right with the Eric and Ernie. Even though it is rooted in its time, for me it doesn't date at all. And some of the references you find it hard to get, and especially a lot of the time when they do fake credits on sketches, you go, I'm going to have to look up who that is and why the audience are laughing at it. But there is a timelessness to it. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Well, it's my number 10. It's a moment, but it's a moment that was in every single show, and it's the "Bring Me Sunshine" song.
That's my number 2.
Yeah. Oh, is that your number 2?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
No, it's because I can't. The reason it's so high for me, I'll let you explain yours quickly, but the reason it's so high quickly for me was because I can't think of Morecambe and Wise without hearing it.
Yeah.
And I think, well, it's got to be something big because they sort of own that song.
Yeah.
Oh, and yet the irony is they didn't finish the show with that song every week. They had 5 or 6 songs.
Oh, really? They
rotated
Mandela effect.
Yeah, so there's a song called "Positive Feeling" which they used a lot. A song called "Following You Around," but everyone, I'll tell you the only reason I didn't put "Bring Me Sunshine" in is because I didn't have time in my top 10, to be perfectly honest. But at Eric's funeral, that was a song they played as he was being brought into my dad's funeral. We had "The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly," which is it's great because it reflects. But you can't. Ed can do that. Ed, in fact, I heard Ed was clearly noticed what I've been researching. So he's been going in. He's 28. He's been going in and out of the kitchen doing "Bring Me Sunshine," but with the arms behind the back.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things. It's impossible. It's impossible to hear the first couple of notes without either A, smiling, or B, doing the dance.
Yeah. And it's weird because the point I was making earlier on is, I think if it was anybody else and they were singing that song like to the camera, you'd be going, "Oh, this is a bit." I don't. But it's because it's them, and because you love them so much, it's never once bothered me. I just love that song.
Well, it's a strange. Sorry to interrupt, Pub. It's a strange thing as well because it's the two Ronnies always ended with a big musical production number.
Right. Yes, they did. Yeah.
Which was always very clever. The words were always very clever. The costumes were fantastic. Sort of big numbers. And I think Eric and Ernie deliberately, because it's the other thing that's really odd, and I found this in my research, because I always associate Eric and Ernie with Saturday nights.
Absolutely.
And it turns out they were never on Saturday night. There was a couple of the Christmas specials were on Saturday night. Their shows were always either on a Wednesday or Thursday, because Saturday night was two Ronnies night, and the BBC didn't want to mix and match. They didn't want to have a two Ronnies and then Morecambe and Wise following it. So I think it's very possible, because there always was a rivalry, that Eric and Ernie deliberately had that simple number at the end, just as a contrast to the two Ronnies, because also Eric and Ernie liked doing it. They'd been doing it for many years. and it's just part of the joy because it's just two men who are so enjoying each other's company. It's like you get the feeling with Cannon and Ball, who are both of whom I've met, and I'm perfectly happy if I never meet them again. One of them would be very difficult to meet again without going through a seance. But I never got to meet Eric and Ernie. I wish I had, because I don't know anyone. A lot of my inside information about Eric and Ernie comes from Barry Cryer, who wrote some stuff for them and was also the warm-up man for most of their BBC shows.
Right.
He just hasn't got a bad word to say about them. And he said the things they loved each day, they adored each other's company, and they were never happier than doing that dance. And because, Eric in particular knew that there'd been a good show, the recording was over, and they did that. And the audience, like I say, it's, even though it wasn't the song they always ended with, in everybody's mind, it is the song they always ended with. It's as simple as that. So in a kind of strange metaphysical way, that's what it's become. Two friends of mine, John T and Ian, did a Morecambe and Wise tribute show, sort of to 2017, 18, 19, and they got permission from the estate, from Eric Morecambe's wife and family, to do 45 minutes of an Eric and Ernie show. And they're brilliant mimics. They both capture Eric and Ernie perfectly. And the first half of the show is a kind of strange framing device when Eric's in hospital, Ernie comes to visit him, and they reminisce, and that's fine, it's funny enough. But I can't remember which, it's one of the classic 1973 shows. They just do the show. Every word of it. And I've never seen an audience response like it. And most of the people in the audience can't have ever seen Eric and Ernie live. But and when they do Bring Me Sunshine at the end, the whole place, it's just astonishing. And everyone's on their feet and everyone's clapping. And it's just an indication of the affection that they have. And this is not just elderly people in the audience. It's a mixed Edinburgh audience. And it's just an indication of how funny the material is, full stop. But also the joy that even other generations, that by osmosis, have picked up on the fact that this is just a gleeful, joyful song. And because as Eric famously said, we're not about politics, we just want to make people happy, which is a very laudable ambition, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. And also it means like a lot to me, and I'm sure to Neil, because on one of our live shows we did that, didn't we, Neil? We did Bring Me Sunshine.
We
did, and it's a song everybody knows, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's a song everybody knows.
And I bet you had a brilliant time doing it as well, didn't
absolutely,
you?
we did. It was so much fun.
To be fair,
yeah, of course.
We did it. It really did.
Absolutely. Right then, Kevin, you're number 9 then, please.
Well, there's a two Ronnies connection here, because arguably one of the two Ronnies' most famous sketches is the Mastermind sketch.
Yes.
Where they answer the question before the previous question, and it's very clever and it's very witty, and they go to great lengths to completely copy the Mastermind set down to every detail. They actually borrowed the real chair. They've got the same lighting. They've got Magnus Magnussen's desk. In 1974, which was, I think, the same year, Eric and Ernie did a Mastermind sketch, which in terms of set, you can only describe as shonky. Right? They haven't made any effort to recreate the studio, but what they've done is they've got the real Magnus Magnussen in, the host of Mastermind, to answer questions. So it starts with Ernie, so name, Ernie Wise, place of education, and he says Harrow University, Oxford, which is already found. He's very pumped, and so he starts asking them these really complicated general knowledge questions. And by the end of it, Ernie's answering questions off the back of the first word, and he gets 10 out of 10. Then Eric gets called forward, and for no reason, Eric's wearing +4s, right, which you don't see until he stands up to sit down. And it says name, Eric Morecambe, place of education, Hildenstone Junior Infant School. So he asks him the first question. The first question is, Little Bo Peep has lost her what? And Eric goes, cardigan. And Magnus says, no, that's wrong, I'm afraid. And Eric says, well, hang on, what's a cardigan made of? And Magnus goes, wool. And where do we get wool from? Sheep. And Magnus goes, "Oh, that's correct. Thank you, one for me." So then basically it's Eric stealing, but there's a fantastic callback in it. The second question is, and one of the most famous little bits is, that Arsenal. It's where Eric and Ernie. Eric's pretending to be the memory man, a la the film 39 Steps, but has no memory of anything. So Ernie has to keep hinting at him. And there's a question where who won the FA Cup in 1930? And Ernie goes, Arsenal. So this is brilliant. So the next question Magnus Magnusson asks is, who won the FA Cup? Eric, who won the FA Cup in 1930? Ernie coughs. Eric goes, Arsenal, correct. There's a bit, so Ernie just gets furious. And then Magnus Magnusson gets cross and says, "Look, we have to say," says to Eric, if you don't know the answer, you have to say pass. This is getting ridiculous. And Eric said, and this is a genius line. And Eric says, "You're quite right, Magnus. This is not a bingo hall." And Magnus goes, "2 right," and Eric goes, "2 for me." Which is just, it all builds to this. So it ends up it's 10-all, and for some reason, Eric gets an extra question, and Magnus says, "Like, you've got to. I can't stress this enough. If you don't know the answer, you just have to say pass." And the question is, it says it's geography, and Eric goes, "Oh, great, geography, perfect." And Magnus Magnusson says, "It rises in the Kindar Mountains. It travels 2,000 miles. It's the main alleyway between Afghanistan and Pakistan and India, blah, blah, blah. It's the Khyber." And Eric just goes, pass. Correct. which is the first time. But it's even more so than the two Ronnie sketch. It's just, for me, just cleverer writing. It just illustrates a change, and I'll come on to this in the next bit, a change in their relationship. The fact that they had the confidence not to build the set, because they didn't need to, because they knew that the jokes were funny in themselves, and just the fact that it starts with Eric, and there's no reason why. He's got the same jacket on as Ernie, but when he gets up, he's wearing +4. So the audience are already giggling as soon as he just makes the and for me, again, it's not the most famous sketch, but it just indicates the cleverness of some of their wordplay, which I think is quite often overlooked. People remember the slapping around the face and the grabbing by the lapels and is he wearing a wig and the short, fat, hairy legs. But some of their wordplay was fantastic. It's up there with the stuff that we hail as genius for the two Ronnies, but with so much more charm. And also so much more. There's an element that the two Ronnies were never a proper double act. They were an actor and a comedian who got thrown together.
Yeah.
They never did stuff together. But there's an element with Morecambe and Wise that again adds to the entertainment. There's an element of how we're getting away with this. Whereas when you watch the two Ronnies, you kind of, Ronnie Barker in particular, is consumed by his own cleverness. Sometimes, you know that they know it's clever, witty wordplay, whereas Morecambe and Wise are just literally, why are people laughing at this? And it's partly because it is just as clever as the two Ronnies, but they're just enjoying them. They're just two blokes who love what they're doing.
Yeah, and like you say, that glint in Eric's eyes, he knows that you know that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's weird because, like, I still do that when I cough and I say Arsenal. Everybody does that.
Yeah.
Everybody of a certain generation, Pam. I think.
Of a certain generation.
Yeah.
Okay, then Neil, you're number 9, please.
So I'm going back to a sketch that I'd sort of forgotten about. I remembered it a lot differently to what I rewatched it, but it still had some very funny moments. It's the Frankenstein sketch with Ian Carmichael. Eric plays Igor, and they've got the bench in there, and they're trying to bring it back. And it's full of obviously a lot of Eric's quips and everything, and talking to the camera, looking at the camera. But also, it's really funny that they decided to place Ernie as the monster in the table. When he comes off, he's got the huge head, and he's he's not very well dressed. It's very shoddy costume, but it's just very, very funny, very funny. But it's all down to Eric on that one with playing Igor, and his addresses to the camera constantly, breaking that fourth wall. It's fantastic. But sorry.
So I was going to say that there's a sketch they do in their first series for when they moved back to ITV after the end of their BBC contract. and he didn't have Eddie Braben writing for them because he was still contracted to BBC. So Barry cried. But it's probably the best sketch of their later years at ITV, and it's with Judi Dench. But it's Jekyll and Hyde,
Right.
and it's worth it just for the fact that it's Eric that plays the monster, which is really so. Ernie does all the camp stuff, and he takes the thing and he goes down behind the counter, and it's Eric that comes up with this terrible fake hairy ears.
Oh, I remember.
But just gleeful. But it's worth it for the running joke because Eric's obviously still down behind the bench where obviously Eric had been through the whole sketch. For the first 5 minutes, Eric had obviously been hiding behind the desk, and Judi Dench and Ernie had clearly not referred to it. But when Eric comes up as the monster, he just constantly steps. So every time he goes behind the desk, he takes this massive, hugely exaggerated step over Ernie's body, which is just a brilliant running joke. It's just really, really, really fun. Judi Dench is brilliant in it, but it's again because it's just the fact that Eric makes such a terrible monster.
Yeah,
he just revels in it, and it's interesting how so much of their stuff they plundered sort of classic literature for their stuff. You know, King Arthur, Robin Hood, Jekyll and Hyde, all sorts of stuff that Sherlock Holmes. They plundered all sorts of Noel Coward, and these are references that the audience would have absolutely known and understood.
Totally
very funny, and always great to have a great straight man like Ian Carmichael, and it makes it all funnier or something like that.
Well, that's a really good point because they very rarely get the fun. They always get a funny line or a payoff. But Eric and Ernie loved working with straight actors because the straight actors were really good actors.
Yeah.
So they always acted as like the baseline to every sketch that Eric and Ernie could then muck about around the decent actors.
And all these top actors were fighting to come and be on like the Christmas specials. And
absolutely,
yeah. Okay, my number 9 is another one that showcases Ernie's singing and dancing skills. It's the Singing in the Rain sketch. Yeah. I mean, I love that movie. Is that your number 5, Neil? Is it?
I think this is brilliant.
It's a simple concept. It's basically the Singing in the Rain number from the movie. So it's Ernie Wise instead of Gene Kelly, and Eric Morecambe is just a copper there, just standing in the wrong place at the wrong time and getting absolutely soaked at all these different moments. But it does show you just what a great song and dance man Ernie Wise was. He wasn't just a straight man. He was the British Mickey Rooney, if you like. You know?
Well, also, I think what that illustrates, and I took a punt that some of the things I didn't put in, I hoped that you would.
We would.
So we could talk about them. But what that indicates is there are 3 or 4 times that Eric gets soaked.
Yeah.
In a long sketch. But for the rest of it, Eric is perfectly happy to stand back and watch Ernie dance. I mean, it's about 4 or 5 minutes long. And it's just a showcase, and you can see how happy Ernie is.
Yeah,
and I love Gene Kelly.
I do.
I think Gene Kelly. Gene Kelly was, for want of a proper bloke. He was a real man's man, and he based a lot of his dancing on sports moves. But some of his stuff, not just in the 40s films, but later in the film, are just brilliant. But Ernie catches it, and Ernie is just in 7th heaven doing this, and it's one of the more elaborate sets they had.
Yes, absolutely.
So Eric gets these laughs, but he's really happy to sit back and watch his mate have his moment, because every now and again I just think it was great for Ernie to remind the people that he was great. He was really good at what he did.
Yeah, because I think a lot of straight men would always be classed as the ones that didn't have the talent because they weren't the laughs. Yeah. They were the guy there to set it up for the funny man to knock it out the park.
Yeah.
But Ernie, and again, one thing you were saying earlier on as well, Kevin, about like looking back in the past, and Neil and I was talking about this earlier on. I can remember loving Morecambe and Wise when I was little, but when they went back to ITV, I can remember getting very bored.
Yeah,
because they weren't as good as they were when they were on the BBC. Yeah. Now I don't know. Looking back on it now, I realise it was because they didn't have the same writers and it wasn't the same. But also, it was the introduction of things like in the mid-80s, the young ones. And not the 9 o'clock news where they famously did the song that was a piss take of the two Ronnies.
Yeah.
I'm pissing up and down on the willy bum bum, and
Yeah,
just totally like destructing that whole idea of these two famous people like doing stupid comedy. But it's interesting when you look back on that with through the mists of time.
It's interesting as well with the young ones, which now looks really dated.
It does.
When you go back to it. And the thing with the young ones, and I've said this to people involved in the show, they started by kicking down the opening titles of The Good Life.
The Good Life, that's right, yeah.
Which represented everything that is twee and fake about BBC comedy. The irony being that the young ones was written by graduates from Bristol and Manchester University, all of whom were from middle class to upper class backgrounds. And The Good Life was written by two comprehensive school boys, Esmond and Larby from South London, who never got anywhere near university. So, but I think the point with when they went to ITV, Eric was ill, but Eric had had a couple of heart attacks by then.
Yeah.
They had different people writing for them. They also the shows were shorter and had commercial breaks, so it changed the rhythm of the thing. And ITV had them doing more stuff with ITV stars, if you like, which were less well known. So I think we mentioned one good sketch. One of the other only decent ones was when John Ford and Dennis Waterman were in they did a kind of Sweeney thing as well, but they also did a sort of Foreign Legion sketch, which was all right. But you don't really. They just look a bit older and a bit more tired.
Yeah,
and they look like the world has moved on a little bit. Anyway, the odd thing is ITV, which is odd, they would only let the two guys from the Sweeney go on Morecambe and Wise if Morecambe and Wise were in the Sweeney. So there's a bizarre episode of the Sweeney where some kind of Russian drug smuggler is using his girlfriend, and his girlfriend is a magician's assistant on the same show as Morecambe and Wise. So you see the Sweeney going into this cabaret room with Morecambe and Wise performing, and there's a line with them, and it's just, and you can see Morecambe and Wise are not really comfortable with it. They're working. I've worked for both the BBC and the ITV, and they're very different processes. Not necessarily one's better than the other, but at the BBC, they really tend to leave you to get on with it. So even if you're working for a production company, the BBC, unless you're breaking the law or there's an obsession now with balance, BBC will still let talent pretty much get on and make the show. Whereas at ITV, and it's always been the case, they're much more. They're all over it. And for example, you have to be careful. They will know who's buying space in the commercial breaks, for example. So they wouldn't be happy with somebody doing a sketch that didn't like cars, because that might put off car companies. So and also, like I say, an ITV hour is 48 minutes. A BBC hour is 58 minutes. And when Eddie Braben did come back to them for the last series at ITV, he found it really difficult to write with that limited frame, because the shows at BBC were so structured. So it in a way, I almost wish they'd retired after their last Christmas special on BBC, because then you'd have nothing but the greatest memories of them. And it's like, and again, some of the ITV stuff is all right, it's fine. And if you hadn't seen the BBC stuff, you'd go, yeah, it's all right. But you're absolutely right. It's clear that they were aware that the world is moving on. It's something that Ronnie Barker was angry about. I mean, there's a famous Ronnie Barker got really stroppy with Ben Elton on a Parkinson, and the irony is that people like Ben Elton had the utmost respect for people like the two Ronnies. But at the time, and I remember this because it was when I was Mark Thomas and I were described as a third wave of alternative comedy, and my dad was furious with me that he couldn't watch Benny Hill anymore, because it wasn't my fault. It wasn't me and Mark Thomas. So it wasn't Ben Elton, and it wasn't Alexei Sale who said these programs have to go. And for a time in the early 80s, these programs coexisted. Alexei Sale was on the telly, and Cannon and Ball was on the telly, and Russ Abbott was on the telly. It's just that we kind of won in the end, but none of us wanted to see people like Benny Hill or Tom O'Connor thrown off the TV. But it's like Eric and Ernie knew, I think, that their time had passed in a way.
Yeah.
There's a certain world weariness about the last stuff at ITV. I think you're right.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Okay, so Kevin, you're number 8 then, please.
That's damning with the faintest of praise. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
I didn't mean it like
I know
that.
you didn't. My number 8 is I did want to reference the ITV stuff because I think we sometimes forget. So they were on ITV. The show was called Two of a Kind. I think it was from 1961 to 1968. So it was their comeback. They'd been off TV for 5 years because the BBC series had been a disaster in the mid-50s. But they came back and did this series, and it was really popular. It got huge viewing figures. But it was a very different beast. And Eric and Ernie's relationship was very different. Ernie was cunning and a bit snidey and sharp, and his role in the show was to get one over Eric the whole way through. Eric was a bit of a gormless idiot who at the same time was constantly randy and constantly trying. So it's a slightly uncomfortable. And they had the two writers, Sid Field and Dick Hill, who were in every sketch as well. So they wrote themselves into everything. So it's so different to what Eddie Braben created for them character-wise. But because it was such a popular series, they got the biggest guests. And in 1964, they had the Beatles on.
Mm.
And I was really pleased when you tweeted that we were talking about Eric and Ernie. I was really pleased that so many of your listeners responded, including this moment, because the whole show is pretty much dedicated to the Beatles. It's a 48-minute show. The Beatles do like 5 or 6 numbers. Eric and Ernie do a couple of sketches in between, but then at the end, before the Beatles' last 2 numbers, Ernie goes out to say hello to them. Ringo's not allowed to leave the drum kit, so it's John, Paul, and George. And then so Ernie's having a little chat, and then Eric comes out, and it's a reference again that nobody will know now. He went, "Oh my God, it's the Kay sisters," which the Beatles, who are 3 musical sisters. But then it's a 5-minute interview with, and it's really interesting because he keeps referring to Ringo as anything other than Ringo. When he first comes out, he goes, "Oh, it's Bongo," and then he calls him Bonzo, and he calls him Bingo at one stage, which the other 3 clearly like.
Yeah.
But there's a brilliant moment with John Lennon, and John Lennon later said it was his favourite TV appearance ever.
Mm.
But John Lennon, as we know, was a chippy little young man. He was quite aggressive. He could be quite arrogant. Oddly enough, obsessed with the Goon Show, and obsessed. He had a sort of encyclopedic knowledge of British comedy, but he clearly wants to take Eric on. And when Eric shakes his hand, Lennon sort of grabs him into him, and he starts saying, "Oh yeah, I remember you. Apparently you were very funny back in the day." And Eric kind of like, it doesn't look like it's rehearsed. But obviously, this is a gesture that most people won't be able to. None of people will be able to see. But John Lennon holds his hand over his knee and says, "I remember my dad telling me about you this high." And Eric just goes, "Oh, was your dad very little?" Right. And there's a moment. The other 2 just break up laughing, and then there's a pause, and then John Lennon suddenly thinks, "He's better than me."
Yeah.
But then they have this 2-minute, this is brilliant 2-minute conversation, which is just very funny, which is mainly between Eric and John Lennon. And then they agree that they're going to do a number together. And Eric goes off to get ready. And for some bizarre reason, the Beatles, who are about to become the biggest band in the world, agree to Ernie's request that they do a song called Moonlight Bay. So they go off. Again, Ringo's not allowed to leave his drum kit. So they go off and come back in like straw boaters and old-fashioned blazers and start doing this really old-fashioned musical number with Ernie, this sort of soft shoe shuffle. Eric comes back on dressed as a Beatle. So again, confusion. But the bit at the end, and this comes back to what I talk about Eric and Ernie being rather rude. There was a running joke at the end of the ITV series where Eric tries to tell this particular joke, and the credits always came up over Eric saying with Ernie going, and the joke was it's two old men on a deck chair on Blackpool Beach, and one of them says, "It's nice out, isn't it?" And the other one says, "You're right. I think I'll get mine out as well." Right? Which is okay, but it's brilliant. As a credit, as Eric starts to tell the joke, John Lennon jumps in and says, "There's two dirty old men on a deck chair," and Eric just cracks up, and then he goes, "You can't tell that joke."
Yeah.
But it's just a brilliant moment. It's just the simple things of all right, bongo, all right, bonzo, all right, bingo. It's just, and at the time for the audience, because the Beatles were 9 months away from being the biggest band ever, and yet here they were happily just doing a soft shoe shuffle with Eric and being taken the piss out of by Eric Morecambe. It's great, and it's a sort of little, because they didn't do that sort of stuff, or they didn't talk to their guests, but it's a little precursor to the stuff they would do later on with really famous people, world famous people, and it's one of those moments, and you think if the rest of that, because I've watched a lot of that series, trust me, for various other shows, you think if the rest of that series was like that, it would be legendary. Whereas it's just they're really slick. They're too slick, and I know this makes it sound like an insult, but they're too American. There's almost an Abbott and Costello feel to it. You know what I mean? And it's quite. And even the writers in the sketches, they're always pretending there's something there that they can see in Eric can't, and it just doesn't quite right. And we'll come on to the genius of Eddie Braben later on, but just now when you look at the Beatles, and of course the Beatles look so young because they are so young, but they're just enjoying themselves, and the way, because you know what happened to the Beatles, and you know 3 years later you wouldn't have seen them smiling like that. In anything else, you know, and it almost breaks your heart in a way that they
were different people then.
They were different, absolutely different people, and it almost breaks your heart that in the course of 3 or 4 years they went, you know, this huge worldwide fame and this huge worldwide notoriety with the bigger than Jesus stuff, and so it's just a really innocent, great thing. And the fact they take the piss out of the drummer, it's just every time I see it, bingo, bongo, and bonzo, it's just
great one. That is a great one. I think the entire episode is up on YouTube, isn't it? I think.
I think it is. Yeah, it is.
All the
I think
stuff with the Beatles on it is.
Yeah, like I say, there's far more ITV stuff, which again I don't know whether it's copyright or licensing or whatever, but
must be.
Yeah, it's worth. I mean, it's worth looking at. I mean, and they had some of the biggest. I mean, you know, the Rolling Stones did it, and the Small Faces did it, and the Kinks did it. So, you know, these big names were happy to come on and mainly promote their singles, but very rarely did Eric and Ernie talk to the other band. So,
I mean, come on, Kevin, you're a big name in the BBC. Surely you can get them to unlock these Morecambe and Wise tapes.
I wish that were the case. I need to talk to somebody and find out why they're not even on iPlayer.
I mean, you're the third coming of comedy, for goodness sake.
Yeah, the third wave of alternative comedy, me and Mark Thomas. Yeah,
Mark Thomas. I mean, that must have some kind of cachet, surely.
And now look at us.
Doing Morecambe and Wise podcasts.
We didn't surf that wave nearly well enough.
Go on then, Neil, you're number 8.
So it's another song that they did. It's the Banana Boat song. I sort of remembered this and then searched it out on YouTube. Now, this is the one where, obviously, it's all down to Eric, Ernie being the singer, can sing. I forget the name of the lady who's singing on this now, so forgive me for that. But yeah, it's Eric. Basically, starts with the tambourine, isn't it? If you remember, and then obviously goes through, and it's a cross between it's physical comedy, the way he uses these different instruments that he's got to not a very good effect, but. And then obviously the big payoff when he hits himself all over. Yeah, it's genius. Now you've seen other people. Who was the guy that used to do with the tin tray?
Oh, I can't remember the Mill Tray.
Yeah, all of that. But it's
Mule Train. No, it's
Mule Train. Mule Train. Yeah,
that's
right.
I can't remember. I don't.
There was sort of reminiscence of that, or whether he was taking the mickey out of that himself, Eric. But it just again, it's the pair. Well, the dynamics between them the song, we all know the song, or it was a song that I knew from the youngster and on.
Yeah.
It was just funny.
It was Nina of Nina and Frederick. Apparently.
Oh, there we go.
Okay. Wow.
There you go.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm great. I mean, I don't know whether this was a BBC sketch or whether it was an ITV one. This one, I wouldn't know.
I think
Kevin,
it was
might know.
BBC. I think.
It sounds like a BBC one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was this is really going to annoy me now unless Pav can look it up. There was a brilliant joke in one of the later sketches. Someone's playing a tambourine and Eric does what looks like an ad lib. I wish I hadn't said that now because it's just going to leave people hanging for all sorts of reasons. But there you go. Sorry.
But that's the thing with Eric Morecambe, isn't it? The ad libs that he did, probably we don't know whether a lot of them were scripted. Probably not. Knowing him, when you see some of the other footage of other things that he did, like "This Is Your Life," which is there's a bit of that on YouTube, isn't there? I had a look.
Well, also there's you can tell whether most of the ad libs in Morecambe and Wise, according to Barry Cryer, most of the ad libs were left in. And he always said you can tell by Ernie's response,
right,
as to whether they're ad libbed, and also because they rarely edited stuff those days, so they leave in quite a lot of mistakes. And Eric loves it when somebody gets something wrong.
Yeah.
But there's a brilliant YouTube clip, and this is where Eric comes into his own. Older listeners will remember World of Sport with Dickie Davis on a Saturday, which was ITV couldn't really afford any sports in those days, so they had horse racing, but then they would have log rolling from Canada and cliff diving from Acapulco, and a bit of darts maybe. But Dickie Davis, who was the host of the show, lived just down the road from Eric, and they went out one Friday night and got pissed, and Dickie stayed at Eric's house, and then when the cab arrived to take him into the studio, and World of Sport was live on Saturday, Eric came with him. So for the first hour and a half of World of Sport, Eric's on the floor with Dickie Davis, just taking the piss out of the laughter from the camera crew is because, and you can't imagine now somebody turning up for you imagine Football Focus and a pissed comedian, and they go, yeah, come on, it'll be fine, it'll be great, but that's exactly what happens, and it's less because Eric was, by all accounts, really genuinely really funny, as was Ernie. They were both genuinely funny men. Yeah. But there was a lot of scripted ad lib. I'm sure some of the ad libs were scripted and rehearsed because they famously rehearsed to within an inch of their life. But they were genuinely spontaneously funny. Although, of course, when you've been doing it for that long, the kind of Rolodex, there are very few situations that come up that probably haven't come up before in their live work together. So some of the ad libs are genuine ad libs, and some are muscle memory, if you like.
Yeah. It's funny you saying that. It's just shot in my memory now. I used to have the Morecambe and Wise book, the annual.
Oh, okay.
And there was, I can remember that there were soccer tips with Eric Morecambe, and it was with Kevin Keegan. So it was permed Kevin Keegan. And I can remember one where it was what did he call it? It was like the dummy, what it was. So it was a picture of him stood in front of Kevin Keegan. And then the next picture is him with his glasses off to the side, so that Kevin Keegan is looking at the glasses, and then he's moving to the other side. And that was Eric Morecambe giving Kevin Keegan the dummy, and then moving on with the ball.
That's hilarious. I'll have to try and find it. Well, I mean, that's one of Eric's most famous jokes. I think he said it on Parkinson when he said, "My ambition was to be a footballer, but then my eyesight went, so I became a referee."
There you go, see.
But that's a great joke. Holding the glasses.
It's so funny.
That's really
because then
funny.
it's got I think Kevin Keegan is then stood there with his head bowed in shame while Eric Morecambe's running down the pitch. It's so good.
That's funny.
Okay, my number 8 is There Is Nothing Like a Dame. Now this is the song and dance episode sketch where it's got all the different newsreaders. You got Michael Aspel. You've got let me see, Parkinson wasn't there, was he? Well, you got Richard Baker. A lot of these people that I'm sure
Kenneth Kendall,
Kendall,
yeah.
But it is such a good. It's just such
Eddie
a laugh.
Waring,
Eddie Waring. That's why I remember him running, doing that one little bit where there's 2 or 3 of them all running in unison. And it took me ages. This isn't on YouTube. I had to go to some other link to find because I could not remember the name of the song. All I kept getting was Cliff Richard and Eric and Ernie dressed up as sailors with like buckets on their feet.
Yeah.
And I thought that was part of the sketch, but it wasn't. And I found it on some other website somewhere. I don't know. I think it was YouPorn or something like that. I found that one. I think it was.
That was a disappointing search.
It was a very disappointing search, especially with "There Is Nothing Like a Dane." So many different things came up that I shouldn't be watching. Well, it shouldn't be on my history anyway. But for me, it's what I remember for. I think that was a Christmas episode, wasn't it?
77.
Sure it was 77.
77, yeah.
And it's getting all these people, and for me, it also is almost like the template for something that I cannot watch, and it's the children in need.
Yeah.
When they get like the newsreaders are doing Grease or something.
Yeah,
and it always, again, it's one of those perfect things when I watch that, or you watch the members of EastEnders doing in Sound of Music or something, it always makes me cringe. Yet you watch them do it and Morecambe and Wise do it, and I find it hilarious, great entertainment.
Well, it's also really interesting because I think it was the year before when Angela Rippon did the Coming Up from the, which is brilliant. Yeah. And that's why they wanted to get all these newsreaders. But in those days, newsreaders didn't do that sort of thing.
No, they didn't.
I'm sure they were only in their 40s, but they all looked 70. They were all proper old-fashioned BBC news people with quite posh accents.
The 1970s, 40s.
Yeah, absolutely. But and also Eric. So the BBC weren't at all happy about having so many of them doing it. And Eric didn't like the idea. Eric didn't think it would work. Eric thought Eric thought it was fine with Angela Rippon, but he had to be persuaded. So of course, because he thought that the newsreaders wouldn't want to do it. Of course, they were all really up for it. But then once Eric was told that they wouldn't actually do all the gymnastics and acrobatics, because it's a really, considering the technology of the day, the editing is brilliant.
It's absolutely fantastic,
because it genuinely looks like these old men are doing brilliant, and it's again, it's true. And the audience watching it at the time I think it's from South Pacific. I think
you're right. Yeah.
So they would have grown up. If you're 50 watching Morecambe and Wise in those days, you probably went flirting or had a date to that film. You know what I mean? So there's all these references that the audience get, and it's funny anyway. And Eric and Ernie are funny, and then you've got these newsreaders, these staid, sophisticated chaps. Eddie Waring was the rugby league commentator, and this little round northern chap doing his thing, and it's great. Their musical stuff was brilliant because again they just took such joy in it. And they never sent it up. In the same way that Two Ronnies sort of would send up the genre that they were doing the music for, whereas with Eric and Ernie they were celebrating it. And were clearly loving doing it. It comes back to your choice of the Singing in the Rain. It was a proper celebration for them. They had such respect for the talents that had gone before them.
And you can also feel that those newsreaders, it was something that they really enjoyed. It wasn't, they didn't have to get coaxed into doing it. They really enjoyed doing that,
which I think took Eric by surprise because he thought they wouldn't want to do it. But there's another one, Barry Norman, who did the film, was the BBC film.
Right.
And they were obviously having the time of their lives.
So much fun.
It is.
Okay, your number 7 then, please, Kevin.
You mentioned Cliff Richard earlier. This one's from 1973. The more Morecambe and Wise I watch now, the more I really look forward to A, the bedroom scenes, but B, in particular, the scenes in their living room, which is where they tended to introduce. So they would have the big guests who would come on the studio floor, and then they would set up that they're going to be coming back, and then they would have. So Eric and Ernie would be in their living room because the conceit was they now live together. This is one of Eddie Braben's ideas. And Eddie Braben changed their characteristics. So instead of Ernie being the smart, clever, neurotic one who was always trying to get one over at Eric, he became the pompous sort of author, harmless, but thought he was much cleverer than he was. And Eric became a little bit more clever, but still innocent. And they lived together, but clearly they were great mates. Whereas in the ITV series, they weren't. You got no sense that they were mates. But in this, they lived together and they were quite happy to live together and share a bed. So you've got this dynamic between them, and they would do. And this particular one is the one with Cliff Richard on from 1973. Because again, any director now or editor would it's 12 minutes long.
Right.
Nowadays, you'd go, right, even if it's Cliff Richard or even if it's Billie Eilish or Ed Sheeran or whoever, they'd say, yeah, I don't care how famous they are, 3 minutes and we're out.
I mean, that's half of a sitcom episode.
It's absolutely, but it's just this thing. So, and the setup is that Ernie spends the first minute. Ernie's got this like mid-60s sort of go-go dancer outfit on because he's decided that he's much cooler than Eric, which Eric's really annoyed about. Even though Eric's doing an Airfix model, he's making an Airfix play model. And Ernie says he's invited Cliff Richard round because he's got this new dance sequence for Cliff Richard to come and have a look at. And of course, Cliff Richard comes in and his eyes immediately taken to the Airfix model, and he sits down next to Eric and he goes, "Oh, it's brilliant." He's asking Eric about the Airfix model, and there's a line he says to Eric, "Have you always been able to make things?" And Eric says, "Yeah, well, my dad was an engineer on British Rail. He was the one who used to weld the crusts onto the meat pies," which is a great line in itself. But for the audience at the time, when British Rail's nationalised train service here was legendarily shit, and it's just and the next bit is Eric says, "Yeah, I love me. It's the fact I made Ernie out of a kit," and there's laughter. And Cliff Richard went, yeah, you can't see the join, which is something that Eric used to say to it. And Eric immediately gets the hump. And he just says to Cliff, "You're not going to do terrible jokes like that all the way through, are you?" Only I'm the one who does that. And then there's a bit where, so Ernie's trying to get their attention and Ernie puts Cliff's latest single on the record player. And Eric just goes, "Turn that off. I can't stand that bloke. He's terrible." And he goes, "He's just sitting there." And he goes, "It's still terrible." But there's another line. And again, it's an indication of how they undermine the stars.
Yes.
Cliff asked him a question. Cliff Richard, who was one of the greatest musical stars at the time. Cliff asked him a question. And Eric just goes, "Well, Cliff." And he said, "You don't mind if I call you Cliff, do you, Richard?" Right? And it's just such a great throwaway line, and you can see Ernie starts to go at that stage, and it all builds up to them doing. Ernie shows them the dance numbers, and Cliff Richard just goes, "That's terrible. That's really old fashioned," and then says to Eric, "Can you come up with something?" And Eric plays one. I can't remember it, but he plays one of Cliff Richard's hits on the single, and Eric goes, "It's good." And Cliff Richard says, "Yeah, it's in there somewhere." But then again, Eric gets cross again. So it's just this wonderful thing about their relationship. It's like really doesn't give a monkeys how famous these people are. It's like the way they treated Elton John, for example. And it's just for the audience at home. It's just hilarious. And again, American listeners may not understand it. It's like I worked on Nevermind the Buzzcocks, which was, shall I say, an irreverent pop quiz for our American listeners, but basically was a sarcastic piss take of pop stars. And they sold the format to America, and it was pulled after show 2 because the American audience just didn't understand the idea of taking the piss out of famous people. Because the American audiences have got the roast, so they get it all off their chest in one go at the end of the year. But this low-level sarcasm and this low-level piss-taking of celebrities, Americans on the whole don't get it. But English audiences love it. You've got all these world-famous, we'll come on to Andre Previn later, world-famous people just having the rug pulled from under their feet by Eric and Ernie and enjoying every moment of it. And it's the same with Cliff. It's like, and Eddie Braben has created this world for Eric and Ernie where they will take the mickey out of each other, but God forbid anybody else comes in and tries to do the same thing. And it's really rather touching. And that's what makes the BBC stuff so successful and so accessible, because you've got these two blokes who just clearly adore each other. And yet it's like literally not knowing, Ernie having to explain to Eric who Cliff Richard is because he does not that fuss. It's great. It's really good. I could have picked 4 or 5 of those living room sketches. Yeah.
They're
They're always highlights for me.
That's the British sensibility, though, isn't it? With famous people, is that we love them, build them up, and then we're quite happy to knock them down. So if Morecambe and Wise are doing that for us,
well, absolutely, but also most of them are savvy enough to know that the British public are going to love them for standing there,
exactly
taking it. You know?
Yeah, of course.
Completely agree.
Absolutely.
Right then, Neil, you're number 7.
So it's another song and a sketch, but this one was black and white. It's Boom Oh Yatatata. Yeah.
This was the
how
one
can
that
we
my
not-
mum said that she absolutely adores this sketch.
It is. I mean, you watch it. I mean, it's beautifully constructed. It really is the way they do it. They keep swapping through. They're trying to sing this song. And we spoke about Ernie laughing. If you watch carefully on this one, you can see Ernie laughing on this one.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when was this one? I don't know.
Well, they used to. Do you know what? Funny, they weren't averse to recycling stuff.
Right.
But so the Andre Previn thing, they originally did. Excuse me, as a much shorter sketch in the ITV series,
Right. Okay.
but with an actor playing the conductor, and Boom Yatatata was from their live stuff. They were doing a version of that from the 50s onwards. So you'll
62
find
62 is the one that's on
the
YouTube,
one on YouTube. But there's also one particular moment. They do it in one of the Ed Sullivan shows, which again is an indication of, you know, other people would have got American writers to help them out, but they just go, no, this is what we do. But Ed Sullivan joins in with this one, but too enthusiastically. So they invite Ed to join in, and Ed's this lugubrious character who just is having the time of his life, but he really shouts the boom. And you can see Eric getting quite cross because Ed Sullivan just doesn't quite get the rhythm of it and how it works. But they did it a couple of times, and it was a reference they used. But again, that's another one I could easily have had. If I'd had 20, that would have been in there.
Yeah.
But no, that is a good one. I only saw that for the first time today because my mum said, "You've got to watch this sketch. Just watch this sketch. See if it gets in your top 10."
It's so funny.
But it's so good. So good. And
so
then this
good.
was one of the ones that Eric reminds me of Vic Reeves so much in the way that he acts. Well, not the way that Vic Reeves acts looks like Eric Morecambe.
There's a touch of the Goons about it as well.
I would say
there's a touch of
the Goons.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the Goons is really interesting. It's like, I've never. Eddie Izzard's an old mate of mine, but this is an argument. Monty Python, I don't get. It just doesn't decide. I appreciate why people would love it.
Yeah.
But I remember I did a gig with Eddie a few years back when Monty Python did their last reunion, which Eddie helped produce. It was a gig for Palace. Eddie's a Paris fan charity thing. So, and Eddie said to me after, he said, I don't know if you want to come. We're doing the last of the Monty Python things at the O2 or wherever it was. Hired a boat. We're going from Charing Cross down to the O2. And I went, well, I quite like the idea of the boat journey, Eddie, to be perfectly honest. Cut to 15 minutes later, Ed, my boy who loves Monty Python, Ed's always been into comedy. 15 minutes later, Eddie came up to me and went, look, do you mind? I've asked Ed to come along the boat. I think you'll appreciate it more. Cut to the video right at the end of the video, and Ed's right in the middle of Monty Python singing "Always Look on the Bright Side of Life." But I don't agree that Monty Python was influential in the start of stand-up comedy. For me, it's there's a lot of racism and sexism in there, and I do appreciate. But the Goons, who I only really discovered properly 5 or 6 years ago, I just think they're incredible. It's astonishing that was going on in the early these three chaps who clearly damaged by the war, doing this stuff at a time you associate with rationing, and I think you're right. I think that there is an element of the Goons in that, and I think where Vic Reeves takes that on further, because what the Goons did and what Eric and Ernie did and what Vic Reeves also did was to wring every single drop out of a particular scenario. It's like just when you think there's nothing more to be had from this song or this sketch, all of those people could find another angle to take it on board. So I think that's a really interesting conceit, the idea that the Goons is in there. That's really interesting. And again, because you see, that's what you get that continuity. It's one of the things, because one of the reasons when I became a comic, I became obsessed with the history of comedy was because I wanted to know where I sat in the context
Yes.
of comedy. I wanted to find out about acts that had done stuff similar to me before I was doing it. Who were the acts who was doing political stuff and one. And so it's really interesting when you say that, Neil, about the continuity between all those three acts. That's really interesting.
There you go. Well done, Neil.
Thank you.
You need to work on the sincerity, Pat.
I do. I'm terrible at it. I'm terrible at it. But well done. My number 7 is a moment which Eric would bring out every so often, and it's his bag trick. It's the paper bag. I still try and do it, and I still can't get that flick quite right. It's pretending that he has a brown paper bag. He throws an imaginary thing up in the air, catches it with the paper bag, and it's just a thing of wonder. It's just the fact that it will be a prop that he will bring in. I saw a sketch today, and that was the punchline. The sketch carried on and carried on, and then he finished by just doing the bag sketch, and then that was it, doing the bag bit.
Do you know why I've not included it in my top 10? I can't bloody do it.
Yeah, that's it.
It looks so, because that's one of the things when Ed started watching Morecambe and Wise as a kid, he thought that was hilarious. Of course, as a good dad, you want to go, I'll do that for it. It's so hard. I mean, hard. All you do is obviously clicking your fingers somewhere, but it's never not funny. It's never not funny. And so, because every now and again he'll throw something up in the air, and you just can't help. And the people next to him can't help it. You just look, just follow this imaginary and it takes for ages, and eventually Eric's eyes will follow, and because his eyes always follow it down, and he does the paper bag thing. It's so hard to do. It looks so simple, but it's a great trick to have up your. There's so many meetings I've been in when I think, I wish I could do that now. This meeting means.
Seal the deal.
It's absolutely. They're bound to employ me now.
I'm sorry, Kevin, but we're not going to have you writing for our show. Hang on a minute. Let me get this paper bag out. Hang on. Great. 6 series and a special. We'll sign you now. Okay, then, Kevin, you're number 6, then, please.
You can't talk about Morecambe and Wise without talking about the Christmas specials, obviously, because I know for a fact, I know there's, as we said, there's a lot of false memory stuff going on about whether or not you sat down as a kid and took all this stuff in. But I know at Christmas, me and my mum, I was an only child. I know at Christmas, the three of my mum used to work she used to run a bar, so she wasn't always there. Dad, she was also quite ill when I was growing up, so he was in hospital a lot. Dad, was a South London working class dad, so God knows where he went half the time. You didn't know, but I had a very happy childhood. I don't want to indicate anything other than that. But I do know that at Christmas we would sit down and watch Eric and Ernie, partly because you didn't have a lot of choice, to be honest. But this is from 1972. And it's one of their sillier ones. And again, we've mentioned that they didn't always spend a lot of money on costumes or props, but this is where they're 2 of Rudolph's reindeer. So they're dressed as so it opens with them on a roof. They're 2 fairly scruffy reindeer outfits. Ernie, for some reason, has got this makeup. He's got his lovely little nose and whiskers and red cheeks. And Eric's just got a reindeer hood on, and basically it's quite a short sketch. It's just one of those ones that the thought of it makes me laugh, because the idea of the sketch is they've been up there for ages waiting for Father Christmas. They've been up there an hour and a half, so they clearly imply that Father Christmas is having his wicked way with somebody in this house. But about a minute into it, Eric, and this is one of Eric's tricks, you'll see this in a lot of sketches, where he sort of lurches forward as though someone's pinched his. He does it to Cilla Black in one brilliant thing when they introduce Cilla Black, and she comes on, and Eric just goes and looks around as though she's pinched him on the arse. But he does this thing, so Ernie talks to him, and Eric just goes, and he looks around and says, "Don't do that. That's not very nice." And he went, and then he said, "You're right." And Eric just says, his nose is freezing, which is fun. And And Ernie says, "Oh, that's Rudolph. He's got a red nose." And Eric says he'll have a black eye if he keeps doing that, which is it's just really because again that harks back to the kind of not brutality, but the kind of no holds barred thing in musical. It wasn't sweet, but he just and again so like 3 times he goes and it just ends with Eric turning around and saying, "Do that again, sunshine, and you'll be a hat rack." Which is it's just so simple. It probably they filmed it. It's just Eric does it perfectly, and you can just picture this reindeer with a cold nose shoving it up Eric's butt and him getting really cross, and it's the best. It's like the best art of any art. It's like a piece of music or a painting. You can't always explain. It's like saying, why is orange your favourite colour? You can't really explain. And there's some pieces of comedy you just go, I'm sorry, that just makes me laugh every time I see it. And it's because even though I'm a middle-aged man now, the idea of somebody getting a cold nose up their bum is still it's still funny. It's just seeing 2 middle-aged men dressed as a reindeer on a terribly reproduced roof. It's just lovely, and it kind of. It's in a Christmas spirit, and it's so not sentimental as well. When you think it's the opposite of sentimental, because everyone loves Santa's reindeer, and it just doesn't occur to you that the 2 at the front are getting goosed all the way through.
I wonder what would happen if I put cold nose up the bum on a U-porn sort.
Don't go there.
Maybe we'll try that a little bit later on.
Scar you for life.
Go on then, Neil. You're number 6.
So people will probably think this should be higher. It's the Cleopatra sketch with Anthony and Cleopatra.
You got it at number 6.
I have, but the reason
this pod ends now.
Yeah, no, there is reasons, and there's sentimental reasons for other ones being in front. But I mean, what's not to love? This is what we've talked about through all the sketches, where they're taking up probably one of our greatest actresses ever to have lived, Glenda Jackson, bless her, and obviously a big homage with Eric and Luton Town FC on placard as well.
Yeah,
I mean, this is one of those ones. How long does this sketch go on for? Because I mean,
it's about 11. I checked this the other day because the Andre Previn one I think is the longest one, but this is 11 minutes. It's up there.
Yeah, because it does go, doesn't it? But it's got full genius all the way through. And I would suggest all of our American friends, this would be a good one to start on, because obviously you should know the story, or at least a bit of the story of Cleopatra or Antony and Cleopatra. You might not all know all the references that Eric and Ernie are pulling out in this whole thing, but it's just the joy of watching Glenda Jackson in this. Is just, she was used a couple of more times, or a few more times, wasn't she?
She did a Hamlet thing, because also she won an Oscar.
That's right.
Off the back of this, because this is one of those in Eddie Braben, who became the writer, had this thing that the playwright wrote, which is because Ernie would persuade these famous stars to do these plays, and Ernie would say that he knocked them off so right at the start of this episode, Ernie basically says that he's better than Shakespeare. And he had a spare hour that afternoon, so he knocked up a better version of Antony and Cleopatra. and so the first 10 minutes of the whole show is him persuading Glenda Jackson to do it.
That's right.
Because she clearly doesn't want to do it, which apparently had to be persuaded to do it. But because she was so brilliant in it, and I'll come on to, because for me, there's 3 minutes in this, which is the best British comedy ever. But because she was a very serious actress, and she was I think she'd already won an Oscar in a Ken Russell film,
A Women in Love.
Women in Love, yeah. So that was the sort of thing she did. She was a Shakespearean actress, but because she played this so well, and there's some beautiful moments. I mean, she was very beautiful herself, but there's some beautiful moments where she starts giggling. But because she played this so well, there was a Hollywood director who cast her in, I think the name off the top of my head, in a comedy with that she won the Oscar for that comedy next year, basically. But I thought we'd probably all agree on what the top 2 would be, to be perfectly honest. So, but we'll talk about it in more detail. But it's for me, I could watch it 5 times a night. I think it's brilliant. I mean, she passed away recently, but she was on this Lenny Henry sketch show thing that I mentioned recently. Last year, looking very old, but she spoke about it with such affection, and she spoke about the fact that she really, what surprised her was that the rehearsal process was so rigorous, because Eric and Ernie loved to rehearse like 2 or 3 weeks before, and she said it was like proper theatrical rehearsing, which she got. But she spoke about how nervous she was when she was doing it. But again, I think this is probably about the 5th time I've used the phrase "time of her life," but she clearly is having the time of her life.
Yeah, you really can see it.
You can see it as well. And we'll talk about it in more detail later. But there's just some great touches in it. And as you say, it's that thing. It's just the fact that Eric was a Luton Town fan.
Yeah.
It's like, because that's where he moved to Bedfordshire when they came down to London and started getting them. And he loved football and he loved Luton Town.
Yeah.
And it's just nowadays somebody would say to him, pick a better, pick a bigger team, or pick a but he's Luton Town. It's very funny, and the audience appreciate the fact that he's and you've got Glenda Jackson, who probably had no idea who Luton Town were, but still, but even the simple thing we'll talk about later. But it's a brilliant choice. Wherever you've got it, it's a brilliant choice.
Right, this is going to be the shining moment in this episode. I haven't got it in my top 10.
What?
And the reason is that I've watched a couple of bits of it and I completely forgot to put it in my top 10. So,
well, that's all right. That's the level of professionalism we're working at. So I think,
well, it is.
I think Eric and Ernie would appreciate that, to be honest.
Do you think?
Well, also, do you know what? I think it indicates as well. Like I said before, this is.
It'd be my number 11.
I thought the Disney one was difficult. I have to say, I really did. Yeah. But this one was. I mean, narrowing it down. Literally, my first long list was 35, and narrowing it down to 15, and then getting to 10. Which I mean, I knew who the first 2 were always going to be, but then after that, it was tricky. So who's your number 6 then?
Well, my number 6. Thank you for asking, Kev. That's
You're
fantastic. Well done. Look at that. See, he knows what he's doing. I mean, he's the third coming of alternative comedy, for crying out loud.
Well, not only that, but I need to go to the loo. So
right. Okay. Well, my number 6 is the Tom Jones with the backup singers with yeah. So to be it's just Tom Jones and Eric and Ernie are doing the backing singing of the yeahs, which are just hilarious. And I noticed doing a bit of research that Reeves and Mortimer, Vic and Bob, did a rehash of this with Tom Jones in 2000, might have been 2000. I think it was something like Night of 1,000 Shows. It was the thing. And so we're talking about the fact that, Eric and Ernie, Vic and Bob, and they do exactly the same thing with Tom Jones. And it is hilarious.
And also what's brilliant about it is because, I mean, Tom Jones is one of those, my mum loved Tom Jones. But so did my dad.
Yeah,
because and the reason it's so funny that Eric and Ernie doing the yeahs is because Tom Jones, even through the TV screen, you can see the chest hair.
Yeah,
you can smell the testosterone.
Yes,
Tom Jones is a virile man.
He absolutely is.
And earlier in the show, Eric's tried to compete with him like I was tough, but just the fact that Tom Jones, this virile, testosterone fueled man. And then Eric and Ernie doing this high-voiced backing vocals behind him with Tom Jones desperately trying not to laugh.
Yeah.
While he's doing it. It's a great choice. That's a really good choice.
Yes, so good. Okay, we're halfway through. Wee break.
Is that okay?
Yes, because I need a wee as well. So
right,
we'll all go.
We'll all go and have a wee. I'll leave all this in. Right, we're halfway through, so it's time for this.
Pop quiz, hot shot.
Okay, it's quiz time. I do feel now. Just as a caveat to this, I write these quiz questions without knowing what the facts are, without knowing what we're going to talk about. So some of these questions might be a little bit easier than they would normally be tonight. So here we go. Kevin, you're our guest. Would you like to go first or second?
I've forgotten about the quiz. I'll go second.
Okay, then. So Neil.
Yes.
Ernie made the first UK mobile phone call on the 1st of January 1985, but on which network?
Vodafone.
is correct. It was
Wow.
Vodafone.
Can I tell you who made the first ever withdrawal from a automated cash point?
Can I have a guess?
Yeah.
I think I know it as
Reg
well.
Oh, do
Barnaby.
It was Reg Barnaby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that came up on a radio show that me and Pav used to do, like our
Yeah.
own for a radio
Yeah.
show, and that's why I remember that. We were joking about it, and then we had a bit of a on the buses resurgence. Not
Yeah,
like we were watching it again, but talking about those things. Yeah. So you reason I remembered that.
Those are the days. Okay, Kevin, your first question. In 2005, whose political manifesto stated that they would make Bring Me Sunshine the new national anthem if elected?
The Monster Raving Loony Party.
Is correct. I don't know how you got those questions right. I really don't. Neil, which famous pop star has a tattoo of Morecambe and Wise on his arm?
Ooh.
Robbie Williams.
Is correct. Well done.
Yeah,
Good knowledge.
I only realised this. I was reading an article about Robbie Williams literally a couple of days ago, and he speaks about having a Morecambe and Wise tattoo.
There you go. There you go. Okay, Kevin, which popular British cop show did Eric and Ernie make a guest appearance on?
Do you know what? I'm glad you said that, because when I mentioned that earlier, the look you gave me indicated that I'd got that wrong. But obviously,
no, the look I indicated was on fucking
that's
hell.
in the quiz.
I've been working out there for like 2 hours these quiz questions.
It's a great question. It's the Sweeney.
It is the Sweeney.
Yeah.
2-2. So Neil, for the win. Their shows attracted numerous guest stars over the years, many of whom appeared in the plays What Ernie Wrote, which 007 star desperately wanted to appear on the show, but was always held back by filming commitments.
Would it have been Roger Moore?
It is Roger Moore. So, I mean, you get the win there, but let's see if we can go straight through and see if we can get 100%. So it'll be 5-5. Kevin, the Beatles famously made a guest appearance on Morecambe and Wise's ATV series in 1963. Which girl group did Eric Morecambe mistake them for?
The K Sisters.
Is correct, yes. Neil, in the famous 1971 sketch with conductor Andre Preview, what was the piano concerto where Eric was playing all the right notes but not necessarily in the right order?
What was it?
What was the concerto? Yes. What was the piano concerto?
I'm sniffing a gap.
Oh no, I can't remember.
I'm gonna get that in my porn search.
No, I can't remember. Let's get that.
Okay,
no,
Kevin.
It was Grieg's piano concerto.
It was, and do you know in what key?
In
in
real life, I did. G.
It wasn't. It was an A minor. But
I'd
give you that anyway.
Right.
Kevin, which somber newsreader sang
Neil, this is Neil.
This is me.
Oh, sorry, Neil.
Yeah.
Which somber newsreader sang the final line of There Is Nothing Like a Dame in the 1977 Morecambe and Wise Christmas special?
Oh. I can't remember which one it would have been.
The tall one with the really deep voice, wasn't it? Can't think.
No, I can't think. How? Sorry.
No, Kevin. Any idea?
No. I apologise to his family and descendants.
It was Peter Woods.
Peter
Woods. Okay, so
that's how contestants always go. They could say Peter Woods, of course. They have no idea. you just do it in that tone. Oh, Peter Woods, of course.
Exactly. Who goes it now? Is that Kevin or yeah, right, Kevin. What is the first item of breakfast food being eaten on the Breakfast Strippers sketch?
Grapefruit?
It's not. No.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wrong one. Wrong one. That's the one I wanted. There you go.
He didn't get a what?
I know he didn't, did he? I forgot to do it.
I'm
sorry.
I'll tell you, Kevin, the way you treat our guests at the moment.
You need to make your guests feel more welcome on this.
Come on, we need to change this up.
Especially as someone who was the third coming of alternative comedy.
Exactly. Speaking of which, by the way, Kieran Maguire had a lovely time.
Good. I'm glad he
did. Except we did a live show in Salford last week together, and 3 people came up to him and took exception to his top 10 Manchester.
No, you're joking.
Absolutely, 3 people.
That's what I like to
Oh,
hear. Good.
yeah.
Has anyone given you
was
any? Oh, sorry, Kevin.
I
Sorry,
was going
Neil.
to say, was it cereal? Not that I've
It
been-
was cereal.
There was
well
it?
done.
Okay.
It was cereal. No one's had a go at you for your Disney, apart from your wife, obviously. For your Disney songs.
I did that. I had a couple of tweets saying, "How could you not have this particular song?" Or
There you go. It's
yeah.
the power of the top 10 list.
I just like them and move on. Basically,
Indeed. That's all you got to do. That's all you got to do. The final question was, who sings and dances with Eric and Ernie with a bucket on his foot?
That's for Neil, isn't it? Or is that for me? Oh, that's for
you,
me.
Kevin. That's
for you,
Kevin.
Kevin.
Oh, for me, Cliff Richard.
It was.
Yeah.
There you go. It finished 4-4. That's not bad.
That's not bad, it's all right.
That's not bad at all. Okay, Kevin, back to your top 10 and your number 5, please.
Well, this was one, oddly enough, one that I had very clear memories of, but found very difficult to prove on YouTube or the internet. And it's a Mutiny on the Bounty sketch from 1971, or as they called it, Monty on the Bonty. And the reason I have very clear memories of it is because Arthur Lowe was the guest on that show,
right,
who played
yes.
who played Captain Mannering in Dad's Army, of course, and who was famously in real life as pompous as Captain Mannering was as well. And again, one of those characters who was only probably 58 at that stage. But so when he's introduced at the start, he's brilliant, a brilliant actor, but he's really unimpressed with Eric and Ernie. And he just keeps Ernie says to him, "Eric's the funny one," and he says, "Well, let me know when he says something funny, and I'll be sure to laugh." And he does it, but then he keeps talking about he wants to meet the star of the show, which really annoys Eric, because it turns out he's talking about Janet Webb, who was one of the people who used to come on at the end and say thank you very much. But they do this brilliant Mutiny on the Bounty sketch, and the reason I managed to track down one bit, which I thought I'd obviously made up, and it must have come out of rehearsal. So he's playing Captain Bligh, and Eric's playing sort of the chief mutineer, the Fletcher Christian character, and it's just the three of them on deck, and he explains to Captain Bligh, who at this stage, Ernie is still loyal to Captain Bligh. He's got his little sailor's outfit on, but Eric has a crutch, pirates type crutch under his arm, but he changes which arm it's under.
I remember this one.
And he explains that the mutinous crew are going to hang Arthur Lowe, Captain Bligh, from the highest yard arm. At which point, Ernie announces that he's got bad news to Captain Bligh, that and he just says, "I'm a coward," so he joins the mutineers. And then Eric, whether it came out of rehearsal, I don't know. It must have done. Eric does a Jimmy Cagney impression, and he tries to juggle the crutch, but he just says to Arthur Lowe, I can't do impressions, but he does this really good Jimmy Cagney impression about, this is the end of the road for you. And without even taking a pause, Arthur Lowe, Captain Mannering, does this impeccable Humphrey Bogart accent. In return, takes an imaginary cigarette out of his mouth and says, "That's how it's got to be, sweetheart." Right, but sounds like Humphrey Bogart, basically, rather than my next door neighbour. And it just brings the house down, because you've got this pompous character who's essentially playing Captain Mannering, being Captain Bligh, and it's perfect. And he does it, and they don't mention it again. But then at the end of the sketch, about 2 minutes later, there's a bit where Eric suddenly says, "Right, it's time for you to go," and he calls his imaginary crew on, and Captain Bligh, Captain Mannering, says, "Wait a moment, I think there are still some people loyal to me and the crew." And the cast of Dad's Army come on, dressed as sailors, and the audience clearly can't believe their luck. So all the main characters, Clive, Corporal Jones, Godfrey, John Le Mesurier, and the final line, and again, this is an indication of the generosity of Eric and Ernie and Eddie Bravin, the writer. Captain Bligh, I can't remember what Captain Bligh says. It's about round up the mutineers, and Sergeant Wilson, John Le Mesurier, says, "Do you think that's wise, sir?" And he goes, "No, that's Morecambe." which is a great line. But you get the feeling that once Arthur had agreed to do the show, you get the feeling that Eddie Braben, the writer, had retro engineered backwards from "Do You Think That's Wise?" and come up with a sketch where he could actually end up by saying it. But again, it brings the house down because the audience can't believe these two legendary shows are together. But Eric and Ernie are perfectly happy for John Le Mesurier, Sergeant Wilson to have the final laugh because they know it's a big laugh. They don't mind who has the big laugh as long as they get it. But Arthur Lowe's acting is just fantastic in it. And it comes back to that conversation we had before about getting straight actors in who are happy to be the baseline around which the comedy happens.
Yeah. That's a crossover of like Avengers proportions, isn't it? For those
a little bit. Yeah, if I've truly understood the reference, I would have said that with more sincerity. But
well, it's 1-1 now, Kevin, isn't it? It's 1-1. Touche. Okay, Neil, your number 5 was the Singing in the Rain sketch.
It was.
My number 5, again, most people might think that this should be a bit higher, but I'm going for the Breakfast Strippers sketch. I mean, if there's one,
that's my
sketch,
number 3.
Okay.
I mean, it's relevant to us. We've talked about this time and time again, haven't we, Pav?
Is this the most iconic Morecambe and Wise sketch? I think it is. Don't you?
No,
do you not think?
No. I think there's one more.
Okay,
it's not.
It's not even in your top 10, Kevin.
It's not in my top 10. No.
But this is to us. I mean, we used to joke about this time and time again, and we contemplated doing this.
We actually did contemplate doing our own version, and I'm so glad we didn't. I'm so glad we didn't.
I don't know. I think it could have been quite funny, but we did. We contemplated it an honour to do this, but I think we chose the Bring Me Sunshine.
I think you're right. Yeah,
it was a lot easier. But,
it was. Yeah.
The reason it's not in my top 10 is because I don't. It was under rehearsed. They were short. They knew they were 6 minutes short on this particular Christmas. I mean, was it Christmas special? I believe.
I believe it was. Yeah.
And the producer John Ammons came up with the idea. When you watch it, you can see it's under rehearsed. The timing's off on a fair bit of it. There's also one of the very few, and I know I'm being oversensitive here, when they do the Old Man River thing with the grapefruit. Negro Litz, which watching it back now, I find it just for me it just looks like an afterthought in a way. I understand why you've got it in there, and there are some joyful bits with especially using the sausages as a kind of strippers belt, and it's great. But I think once I learned that it was under rehearsed, you kind of then. You pretend that you knew that yourself. You see, I mean, you can't sort of unsee it.
Yeah,
and it's like, I think there are song and dance. For me, there are song and dance numbers that more accurately reflect what. But I can understand why civilians like yourself.
Yeah, but also, Kevin, I'm going to
just normies. Yeah,
to be honest, when they did the grapefruit bit. I didn't even twig until
no. I didn't. None of us did at the time.
I still didn't until you just told me.
Yeah,
it's again. It's only on later viewing with people pointing that out to me that you kind of go, oh yeah, I do. But it's absolutely completely innocent. They wouldn't have made that connection, but. I do understand why a lot of people really like it, and it is joyous. And there's some great jokes with the flipping the pancakes up, them not coming down. But I'm just gonna pretend that I could see all the technical issues.
That's fair enough. I meant to say while we were having our middle-age break earlier on, I looked on eBay. You can buy the Morecambe and Wise special annual for £4.99 on eBay.
Oh well,
it's a 1977 special. So
I want to see that Kevin Keegan thing.
I would thoroughly recommend it. Yeah. Okay, so that was that my number 5? No, my number 5. So we're on to you, Kevin, for your number 4, please.
Number 4 is a bed scene. It's the bed scene with. Arguably the best one-liner of all Morecambe and Wise things. It famously Eddie Braben, the writer on the BBC shows, because what happened when Eric had a heart attack at the end of the ITV series, and they weren't sure in 1968 whether he would work again, and Sid and Dick, his writers, decided to take that opportunity to look for other work, and they got a contract at ITV as producers and writers on all sorts of things. So they left Eric and Ernie basically. So Eric and Ernie had no writers, and famously Eric said he only found out they got on a plane to Mallorca to recuperate from his heart attack, and the air stewardess said, "I'm sorry to hear your writers have left you." He didn't know about it. So they then got offered the BBC series, and a chap called Eddie Braben was asked to write for them. Eddie Braben had written for Ken Dodd, and Eddie Braben very interestingly talks about the fact that he didn't like Morecambe and Wise. He went to meet them to say that he didn't want to write for them because he just didn't like the dynamic of their double act. He didn't he didn't like the wisecracking straight man, for want of a better word. You can't have a wisecracking straight man, but the clever straight man and the slightly dumb thing. But he said they had such a long boozy lunch, and he saw the way they were with each other, and he took the job because he thought that he could replicate that relationship in the BBC series. And it probably took 2 series of the BBC for that to really, really work. And that's when what we all consider, I think, the classic of Morecambe and Wise kicked in. But he also talks about, and whether this is, he also talks about persuading Eric and Ernie to do these scenes in the bedroom. That they'd established that they were living together, and Eddie had this idea that, very innocently, that they should sleep together as well. And at the time in the 70s, like my dad, I remember my dad once saying to me, he never slept on his own. As a kid, he shared with his brothers. Then he joined the army, and he shared with 12 others, and then he was in the Navy, and he shared with 3 others, and then he got married. So it wasn't an uncommon thing. And my Irish uncles would come over from work and would share a bed, which I know because it was my bed. I had to sleep on the sofa. So it wasn't an unusual thing. But Eric apparently worried that people would think it was effeminate or strange. And famously, Eddie had to say, well, if it's good enough for Laurel and Hardy, it's good enough for you, surely.
Exactly.
But Eric insisted, oddly enough, that he should be smoking a pipe most of the time in bed to make it look like there was nothing effeminate or gay in this relationship, which I don't think anybody would have thought that anyway. And that's possibly the theory that in a famous episode of Porridge, where the wives and partners visit the prisoners, and Lukewarm, played by Christopher Biggins, who's the gay prisoner, his partner visits him, and he's smoking a pipe on the bus, which apparently was Dick Clement and Neil Ferne's little dig at Morecambe and Wise, saying gay people do smoke pipes.
Right.
But what you've got in these bed scenes is 2 blokes in the same bed arguing about who's got the soft side of the mattress or the breezy side. And it's just an excuse. And it's just the most famous one from 1973, where they're in bed together. Ernie's reading the Financial Times. Eric's reading the Dandy or the Beano, and it starts with Ernie going, I just don't get it. I just don't understand it. Argentinian stocks have gone up, and Eric says, I've got the same problem I have. Desperate Dan's just eaten 3 cow pies and he's still hungry. So it's like that sort of really innocent thing, but it leads to, so that the whole sketch, 7-minute sketch, is Eric's really upset because there's a draft coming in from his side of the bed, and he keeps trying to con Ernie out of his side of the bed. And it's the one where Eric gets up to investigate something at the window. There's a red, and as he gets up, the police car goes by, the siren goes by, and he utters one of the greatest one-liners in the history of British comedy. He's not going to sell many ice creams going at that speed.
Exactly.
Which is such a brilliant. I mean, in any other sketch, that would be the punchline of the sketch.
Yeah.
And by all accounts, Eric simply couldn't wait to do it. And in rehearsal, Eric kept mucking up because he was so excited about doing it. But he times it perfectly, and it's fantastic. And then the punchline is that Eric says, "I think you should come and see this." And he says, "Well, there's a red sky." And so Ernie says, "Oh, red sky at night, Shepherd's Delight," and Eric says, "No, no, red sky at night, your bank's on fire." So Ernie jumps out, and Eric jumps in, but it's just the ludicrousness of two middle-aged men in bed together, just because why? You don't know why. Surely they can afford 2 rooms, you imagine, but they just seem to like to be sleeping together, and they just bicker, but it just underlines their characters. That Eric's is basically schoolboy, and Ernest is, thinks he's cleverer than everybody else. And there's another bedroom sketch where they have an argument. Ernie starts to remind Eric that he had much better Christmas presents than he ever did. I had a bag of tell, and Ernie mouse, and Ernie says, "I had a little dinky." And Eric says, "You still have?" And it's like, it's just, again, it's just joyous. Basically, it's just joyful. I mean, childlike.
You don't think of asking questions about it, do you? That's the thing.
No, you don't. As a kid, you don't. But even now, you kind of go. You don't have to explain it. You just take it for granted. It doesn't bother me that you're in bed together.
No, and I think that when you equate it to Laurel and Hardy, because Neil and I are both massive Laurel and Hardy fans.
Same here.
There you go. Well, there you go. That's the next one, then, isn't it? Top 10 Laurel and Hardy.
Yeah. Well, poor people did share beds. I mean, as like I said, people shared beds in those days. It wasn't.
Yeah.
And nobody turned a hair with Laurel and Hardy. We should. I mean, Laurel and Hardy. I mean, that would take me 6 months.
That might have to be a 2-part.
It may well have to be. Yeah. Well, this one's turning into a 2-part.
It is close to it. It is close to it. Go on then, Neil. You're number 4.
So my number 4, we've spoken about watching Morecambe and Wise with your family, your parents, and everything like that. But sometimes things stick with you for the rest of your relationship with your family. And you're adorable when they do that is something that's stuck between me and my dad still to this day. So whenever I will say to either one of us might not hear what we say, and rather than just go, "Pardon, excuse me," we go, "Hey." And there it goes. Straight away, we're into it. And we still do it. So that started from when I first saw it. When I was younger, we started it, and we still do it to this day. It's just one of those things, and that's why I put that really high. For that reason, the reason of the unity.
I think that's beautiful. I generally do it. It speaks of the power of comedy as well. That you and your dad probably watched a lot of TV together, but it's that throwaway thing that sticks, and I find that really quite touching to me. I think it's brilliant, So,
oh, bless you.
And it's
like we say, my dad's going to be 80 next year, which I still can't get over. And to this day, we still do it. Either one of us, or even if my mum. We both usually come out in unison and do it to her.
It was the second anniversary of my dad's passing yesterday, so it's been a bit of a difficult. But my dad and I were very close. But he loved and again, unfortunately, Benny Hill. He just loved Benny Hill. He loved Benny Hill, and every now and again, my dad would just out of nowhere go, "Why are you not crapping?" And it's like, unfortunately, he would pick some of the less right on Benny Hill things. But he just, Benny Hill made him laugh more than anything else. And it's like, he loved Morecambe and Wise. He loved Laurel and Hardy. Genuinely, my earliest memory is watching Laurel and Hardy with my dad as a kid, sitting on my dad's lap with him laughing. And it was below 0. So it was, it was snowing on Laurel and Hardy, and it was snowing outside. It was Christmas. So it was like
nice.
And my son Ed loves Laurel and Hardy as much as I do. I think it's Morecambe and Wise. There's a certain. It's like Ali will watch Morecambe and Wise, me and Ed, but there's a certain maleness. There's a certain silliness. I think that because men are more childish anyway. It's the same with Laurel and Hardy. I think. This is a sweeping generalisation. I know lots of women who love Laurel and Hardy, but I think it's more of a Laurel and Hardy. It's more of a male thing.
I think you're right.
I think their fan base is probably more exclusively male than it is female, and I think there is an element of that with Morecambe and Wise, because I think men kind of, we've all got mates that you behave differently with, that you're more comfortable with, that you have a lifetime's worth of references about. And it's the same. You talk about you and your dad going, "Hey, it's adorable." There'll be hundreds of people that what's that all about? And
yeah,
you don't need to explain it to your close mates. You just get the references. It's just like
that's it. It's fantastic feeling.
yeah.
It's lovely.
Yeah.
That's a great one. Okay, my number 4 is Shirley Bassey and the Stage Hands.
Yeah.
I love that kind of hidden comedy. I love those slow reveal moments, and this sketch is full of them. Whether it's they're cranking the stage behind, so everything's looking glam and glamorous and showbiz with Shirley Bassey. She starts moving around, and then it's just Eric and Ernie in their brown coats, just moving it around like Windy Miller. There you go, kids. There's another name for you. And also to the point that they have to give her one of their boots as she's walking down the stage. It's just a great sketch.
Yeah, I would have chosen that. I've chosen something similar for number 3, but it's one of those where you wonder how Shirley Bassey's agent explained it to her.
Exactly.
Or whether they just said, "Look, Morecambe and Wise want you." She just goes, "Yeah, great, fine." And then
exactly.
And then they explain it to her because, again, she's such a beautiful woman, such a brilliant singer, happily agreeing to end up wearing a pair of bother boots essentially at the end, and she's trying to sing all the way through it. Gamely trying to sing all the way through it, because in any other show they would have just said, "Yeah, we want you to come on, sing. We'll pay you £1,000, whatever." Here they're going, right, the stairs are going to fall apart. You're going to lose your step. It's like, it's great.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Okay, then. So, Kevin, what is that number 3?
Well, it's an almost identical. But I could have chosen the Shirley Bassey one, but I chose the Penelope Keith one from '77. And Penelope Keith was the star of The Good Life. She played the very posh character in The Good Life. I found her really sexy then, and I find her really sexy now. But she was a very aloof character, and she ends up in a sketch. They do this Cyrano de Bergerac sketch, and there's a great line. I can't remember what character Ernie's playing, and he says, "What would it take for you to kiss me?" And she says, "Chloroform." But she does it perfectly. But so she comes on at the start, and one of the genius things that Eddie Braben did is that if you watch the ITV shows, Eric and Ernie are on the floor. They're just on the studio floor. But when they went to BBC and they got Eddie Braben in as their writer, Eddie clocked these are stage performers. So he raised, and I remember Barry Cryer telling me all about this. So he came up with this idea that they just built a tiny little stage on the studio floor. It was only raised a foot up, but they added, so it was a proper stage, and they added curtains to it. So it looked like Eric and Ernie were on stage in a theatre, but in a TV studio. And it gave them the opportunity to do all this stuff from behind. So many of the jokes involve, giant ventriloquist dummy's legs coming out or Eric's arm coming out. But also it's just great because they would stand in front of the theatre curtain and then bring their guests on at the start. And Penelope Keith comes on, and she's just brilliant from the start, because when they start to take the mickey out of her, Eric comes on and she just calls him Derek all the way through. And it's a really simple thing, because normally the famous guest stars don't answer back until much later on, but right from the start, and obviously it was written for her, she takes control of this situation. And so she gets this status right at the start. It's brilliant. So they establish that she's actually in command of this thing. And then there's 5 minutes of Eric and Ernie stuff, and then it cuts to this wonderful Hollywood-style curtain thing, this huge, great sweeping staircase. Eric and Ernie are in the top hat and tails, and Penelope Keith is in this thing because she's only agreed to do the show if she can do a big Hollywood number. And so they do it. It's great, and the music's playing, and they sweep down the stairs, and then suddenly it's revealed that the stairs only go halfway. So the rest of the stairs are gone. So there's a 10-foot drop. All you can see is the scaffolding.
Yeah.
And Eric just goes. So Eric and Ernie just sort of go to the side. There's a little bit of muttering among the time. So, and she just starts going, I've got vertigo. And Eric says, well, what's your stomach got to do with anything? She said, no, I'm scared. I'm scared of heights. And they go, well, there's no other way down. And of course there is in real life. If somebody was just helping, but you just buy into the fact that they're stuck on the top of the staircase.
Yeah.
And so Eric starts climbing down, and Penelope Keith says, no, I can't. Just his spirit. He just says, do something with the dress, love. Right. And she shoots him this look at that. But then it's just this brilliant 3-minute slapstick thing where they're trying to retain her dignity. So she like hoists her dress up, right, and puts this takes her head down, and they're just trying to get her down from this, and they're aware that she's a dignified lady, and she's just, and it ends. Eric's beautifully timed, because Eric just sort of goes to wipe his brow, knocks his top hat off, and then as they get her down, her stiletto goes through Eric's top hat.
That's right.
But then instead of just stopping and they just carry on with the number. So the music starts again. So her hair's down all over the place. Eric puts his top hat on, and it's got her shoe stuck in the top hat, and they just carry on the number as though nothing had happened. It's just again, I'm using that word joyful, but it's just the brilliant way they use the guest stars. And the Shirley Bassey thing is exactly the same. The brilliant way they get these huge people that we love, who are happy to play against character. But it's just great that every now and again they bring somebody on like Penelope Keith who goes, no, I want to be the boss in this one. And they go, fine, great, because that works, because they get to the essence of what their character is. It's lovely. I love it.
And there's definitely something about Penelope Keith as well.
I don't know what it is. It's like, I know traditionally men of our age at that time would have found Felicity Kendall very attractive, but for me it was Penelope. There's something about the sternness of Penelope Keith.
Yeah.
And it's one of the for me, I wasn't a huge fan of The Good Life, I have to say, because I understand what the young ones are saying about it being quite twee and very middle class. But the episode, and it's a Christmas episode where they're playing charades, and Penelope Keith gets drunk and starts getting really flirty and inappropriate.
Oh, right.
It's just fantastic. She starts to come out of herself and starts, and she starts to realise that she's being flirted with, and she starts coming out with these double entendre. And it's like, I remember as a kid thinking, oh my God, I wish my mum and dad weren't in the room. It's like, but Morecambe and Wise and Eddie Braben were brilliant at just picking the thing out. It's like the Elton John one. It's like, Elton John's really cool, so they just find loads of ways of making Elton John not cool. At one stage, they have Elton John travelling around a building, and it's one of the few times they use sort of non-studio bits. He's travelling around and trying to find his dressing room, and he opens one door, and Arthur Lowe's in there for no apparent reason. There's Captain Mannering character who just goes, "Who are you?" So it's all this time Elton John, who comes on as this big flash, I'm the king of rock and roll. They spend 40 minutes just undermining him completely until at the end he gets his big number. But it's like they clearly sat down and worked with the stars and said how far they were prepared to go.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned before, Pav, it was a great honour for these people to be asked to do Morecambe and Wise. Yeah.
Yeah. That's got to be a tick off the box,
Yeah,
isn't
absolutely.
it?
Yeah,
absolutely.
On the list, yeah. Okay, then, Neil, your number 3 was Breakfast Strippers.
Yep.
Yeah.
My number 3 is the tap dance routine. So you have, I don't know how many dances there are.
There's about 12 of them in the end, isn't there?
12 in the end, but Eric and Ernie are on the ends, basically, to start with. So you can just about see them. They're both being covered by the side curtains. And then every time they go and do a bit of a dance routine, they're getting caught and they're getting stuck in between the other dancers, and that ends up with a little bit of a fisticuffs. Yeah. The timing on it is just fantastic. And just the way that they get into it looks like they're about to have their big moment of doing some kind of tap dancing, and then the rest of them sort of start moving in front of them or moving their hats so that you can't quite see their faces. It's just great. It's about 2 or 3 minutes long, but
and they're all younger, and because it starts with Eric and Ernie together.
That's right.
And then this chorus line come on. I think it's 6 on each side, and they're all younger and taller than Eric and Ernie, and very good looking. And
Well, don't they? I think they go to the side and then like 2 or 3 join, don't they? And then they
yeah,
move along.
and each time, so it ends
And
up with 12. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it ends up like a whole ensemble of them. But yeah, it's such a good one.
But I mean, that must have taken a week to rehearse the choreography.
Easily, because they got the time in perfection.
But again, the joy of it, I can't stop using that word, is the fact that the dance captain had obviously said to them, you can't laugh. It's really important that you can't laugh. But it's clearly so difficult for them not to laugh, especially when Eric's getting really cross with it, threatening one of them at the end with the cane. It's like,
well, because they start rolling around the floor and everything, don't they? But yeah, it's such a good one. It's such a good one. That is on YouTube, so that'll go on the Patreon video playlist. Okay, so Kevin, you're number 2, please.
Number 2, I think a lot of people would say this is the most iconic Eric and Ernie sketch, and the one that most people can quote from. It's the Andre preview one, the Andre Previn one, from 1973. Andre Previn at the time was one of the most famous people in the world.
Yeah.
He was a conductor, but he was American. I can't remember his European background, but he was and he was going out with Mia Farrow. He was like this sexy young conductor. And what's interesting is A, they got him to do it, which is incredible. B, it's 13 minutes long. And C, they assumed that the audience knew about classical music, which they would have done because schools all had music rooms and music teachers at the time. A lot of adverts had classical music as their theme tunes. We talked about the audience before. During the war, concerts were free to get into, and music. So classical music was something that was in the consciousness of people in a way that it simply isn't now. And you simply wouldn't, if you tried to sell a 13-minute sketch to someone now, they would laugh at you. If you tried to sell a 13-minute sketch that had the London Symphony Orchestra in it, they would laugh at you. And if you tried to sell them a sketch that involved around knowledge of the thing, but there's Andre Previn, and again, it's become the stuff of legend that Eric got very agitated because Andre Previn couldn't rehearse. He simply didn't have the time to rehearse, and they used to rehearse for 3 to 4 weeks with the guest stars. And Eric said, no, if he can't rehearse, he's not doing it. And in fact, somebody from the production team met Andre Previn at the airport with the script, and Andre Previn learnt it in the car on the way there. They didn't even rehearse it in the studio, and Eric was apparently sick with anxiety about this. But Andre Previn does it perfect. So it starts with just him and Ernie, and Ernie says, "Thank you so much for coming to conduct this." And it's a different piece of music. And Andre says, "Well, I've always wanted to work with Yehuda Menuhin." And Yehuda Menuhin was a world famous violinist at the time, who used to. And there's this brilliant comedy. So the first 2 minutes is this great running joke because he says Yehuda Menuhin, and Ernie goes, "Who?" And then Andre Previn explains who he is, and Ernie went, "Oh, there's a slight problem there with Yehuda Menuhin." And Andre Previn goes, "Who?" So there's this thing where they both keep doing that, and it turns out Yehuda can't do it because he's double booked with a panto in Blackpool, which is just a great conceit anyway.
Yeah.
But so Andre Previn keeps saying, I'm not doing it. He's got me here under false pretenses, and he says, "No, we've got the second greatest classical pianist in the world," and he introduces Ernie, Eric rather, who clearly has no idea about classical music. And there's a bit where Andre Previn says, "Oh, okay, right, I'll do it, but I'm just going to go and get my baton." Of course, it's in Chicago, which he delivers, and you can see Eric go. Eric actually goes, "Pow! Wow, he's in!" Because Eric looks nervous at the start for the first time ever, but then he realizes that Andre Previn's got it. He understands it. He knows what he's doing, because the one thing Eric said to him in the half hour they had was, "Don't ever be anybody else under Andre Previn. You don't know. As far as you're concerned, this is all serious."
Yeah.
And then you go into the music stuff when the bit where Eric says, "You're coming in too early," and he says, "How many bars?" He says, "This far." He holds his hand, and it's just
That's right.
yeah, and the orchestra. The other bit which is brilliant. The orchestra are just pissing themselves all the way through.
Yeah.
Because this orchestra, the conductor is the king. No one ever takes the piss out of the conductor. So not only is it a conductor, it's Andre Previn. They're taking the piss out of Andre Previn. And they love it. And then of course you've got the greatest. You're playing all the wrong notes.
Yeah.
And there's just a brilliant reaction from Ernie, because Ernie just goes. Ernie buys into it that you've insulted the greatest, and the classic. I'm playing all the right notes, but not necessarily in the right order. Which my father-in-law, who was a Methodist minister, God rest his soul, I loved him to bits, but he's quite a serious man. It goes with the job. But if ever he was stressed or annoyed after a long day vicaring, you would just put him down in front, because he loved it. He loved that piece of music. And you talk about your dad and it's adorable. Ian never lost any opportunity to say, I'm playing all the right notes, but not necessarily in the right order. And again, it's just to extend that Ed, who plays piano, Ed would play the piano with him and get the notes wrong, just so Ian, my father-in-law, could say to Ed, you're playing all the, you're playing all the right notes. And again, it's that power of the power of comedy.
Yeah,
it is. It really is.
It's just, it's 13 minutes long. And of course you can look at it now, you go, well, they're all white, middle-class, middle-aged men, but it's like, and rightly so, you wouldn't cast it like that these days. But at the time, it's almost perfect. If it wasn't for the fact that my number one choice, I think, is perfect, then this would be, but I know for a lot of people, this is the people who have never seen Morecambe and Wise will say, I'm playing all the right notes, but not necessarily in the right. And the fact that he grabs he grabs
Andre Previn.
He grabs Andre Previn.
And then nose to nose.
Nose to nose. And Andre Previn is just straight faces it, just deadpans it out completely.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. If you didn't know, you'd think that Andre Previn was a comedy actor or had that 6 weeks rehearsal. So it's really incredible given the circumstances. But that one moment when Eric goes, pow, he's in, he's got it. Is wonderful. It's great. And I think it's Ernie's finest moment as well, because Ernie trying to broker his way between Eric and Andre Preview, and the fact that it's never not the 15th time they say Mr. Preview, it's just really funny. And then of course, again, cut to the start of next year's Christmas special, which the first scene is Andre Previn,
a bus conductor,
and it pans out.
Yes.
I was on the Morecambe and Wise show once. This is what happens to me. He presses the bell.
I forgot about that.
Yeah,
I forgot about that one.
It's a year later, and they're doing a running joke, and they get Andre Previn back in the full bus conductor's uniform. It's brilliant.
That is fantastic. Yeah, it's such a good sketch. I mean, there's no secret. It's my number one. I've got it as my number one.
Well, it's my number one as well.
Yeah. I think it's, and the thing is, it doesn't feel like 13 minutes. That's the thing.
Yeah,
it's beautifully crafted. And again, I didn't know the whole backstory of the fact that Andre Previn didn't have the rehearsal. You would never know that.
No, exactly.
And the thing is, with all of these top stars, the only way that it works is if they play it completely deadpan. If they've got a glint in their eye, or if they're winking at the camera, it will never work.
Yeah.
So it's almost like that's the whole point, is you're looking at this amazing artist being absolutely torn to shreds by these two buffoons.
Yeah, because it's Eric's job to know what's going on and to wink at the camera.
Exactly.
But even in this one, Eric plays it completely straight as well. Eric's like, who's this idiot to tell me that I'm not playing it properly?
Yeah. So much so that the whole come around at the end is that Andre Previn then plays it the way that Eric Morecambe was playing it.
Exactly.
Yeah. But as I mentioned earlier, they did do that. They did a 3-minute version of that sketch in their ITV show,
right,
in the 60s. So they were very good at keeping his ideas up their sleeve.
Yeah.
And somebody would have said, why don't we do that again? Well, it'll work if we get Andre Previn. And somebody would have said, we'll never get Andre Previn. And somebody else would have said, well, you might as well ask.
Yeah.
Well,
and it would have all been done by letter in those days or transatlantic phone call. But
I mean, Kevin, that's how we got you on the podcast. We thought, well, we're never going to get Kevin Day on the podcast.
let's do a bit of fishing. Let's put let's put a Twitter trail out there and see if he follows these crumbs.
Exactly.
But I mean, it shows the test of time as well. Whenever they show greatest sketches, that seems to be the one that they always use, isn't it?
Yeah, and rightly so as well. Yeah, because I think you said it, Neil. The hit. Yeah, you watched again. I watched a lot of sketches for this, and you kind of go. Actually, I remembered more jokes in it, but there's always a good hit rate in the sketches. But that one, there's not a wasted line in that one.
No.
And like I say, the joke, which one's the fixer, which is a joke just for the orchestra. It's great, and it's almost them at the height of their powers, were it not for what we're going to talk about as my number one. Basically.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so Neil, your number 2 was Bring Me Sunshine.
It was.
My number 2, I'm going for the 75 Christmas special and the whole Des O'Connor stuff.
Oh.
I mean, I love the fact that they had this whole backward and forward, with Des O'Connor. He was a constant person that they kept taking the piss out of. And the fact that they're absolutely slamming him to start with, and they don't realize that he stood right behind them, and then all of a sudden they change their mind, say how great they are, and then they'll let him sing, but they're not going to let him sing. And Des O'Connor was one. I don't think Des O'Connor ever made it in America, did he? He was quite a British.
He was. I think for your American listeners, Des O'Connor was a not bad singer.
No,
but he was a very middle of the road.
He had a style.
Sort of entity. He had his own show. He was really well known. He had his own show on ITV, like 2 series a year.
Yeah.
So he was very successful. But they were old mates. They were, they tell this story about doing the Glasgow Empire, which was traditionally the hardest place in the world. It's a story that Eric loved telling when Ernie walked on a Friday night at the Glasgow Empire and said something, and then Eric came on to complete silence, and his Glasgow voice shouted out, "Fuck me, there's 2 of them." But they tell the story, which Des O'Connor was so worried about it, he pretended to faint as he went on. So because he was just so scared. So Eric and Ernie and Des were old mates, but Des O'Connor was canny enough to he always said this. He said every time Eric and Ernie took the piss out of him, he sold 5,000 albums.
Yeah.
Basically, because and then again, but there was real affection, and they were quite cruel to him, but there was real affection. There was real affection there as well, and which the audience picked up on. It's like audiences are very clever at picking up on real tension, but there was no real tension there, and it was just childish taking the mickey out of someone who's standing there behind him, and they go, "Oh, we didn't realise."
Was it them that did the sketch, the brief sketch with the fishing, or was that Russ Abbott? Do you remember where he had the record player, and they put the Des O'Connor record on there, and then cast it out in?
That would have been them, because I don't think anybody else would have.
Fish jumped out.
Yeah, it was them. That was them.
That's right. Yeah.
Because the one thing about this bit is they actually let him sing, and he's walking down the stairs.
Yeah.
And he keeps going, but he keeps going down and disappears.
Yeah.
While Eric and Ernie are walking along the edge of the stairs, and then they get to the bottom and they shake hands, and then they just go.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, it's so good. Okay, before we find out what Kevin's number 1 is, Kevin, do you want to just run down your 10 to 2? Neil will do the same, and then I'll do the same.
Yes. So hang on, let me get my paper. So at number 10, I had the Top of the Form sketch from 1970. At number 9, I had the Mastermind sketch from 1974. Number 8 was the Beatles, 1964. Number 7 was Cliff Richards, 1973. The Reindeer sketch from 1972 is at number 6. Number 5 was Mutiny on the Bounty, Monty on the Bounty. Number 4 was the bed scene and the police car ice creams joke. Penelope Keith, number 3, and Andre Preview at number 2.
Lovely. Neil, your 10 to 2?
So my number 10 is The Jungle Book. Number 9, The Frankenstein Sketch. Number 8, The Banana Boat Song. Number 7, Boom, Ooh, Yata-ta-ta. Number 6, Cleopatra with Glenda Jackson. Number 5, Singing in the Rain. 4A, You're Adorable. Number 3, Breakfast and the Dance Routine. And number 2, Bring Me Sunshine.
Lovely. And mine is number 10, Bring Me Sunshine. Number 9, Singing in the Rain. 8, There Is Nothing Like a Dame. 7, The Bag Trick. 6, Tom Jones Backup. 5, The Breakfast Strippers. 4, Shirley Bass's Stagehands. 3, The Tap Dance Routine. And at number 2, Des O'Connor's 75 Christmas Special. So, Kevin, what is your number 1 Morecambe and Wise sketch stroke moment?
I think most people listening would have realised by now what it's going to be. And it's from 1972. It's Glenda Jackson in the Antony and Cleopatra, which I think there's a 3 minutes stretch in this sketch, which I would. It sounds a bit pretentious to say represents for me the high watermark of British comedy, but I think is probably, if you had to choose a moment that was the best British comedy ever, and that's the highest of praise, it would be for that. It's just, and it's really interesting as well because it's the famous line, "All men are fools, and what makes them so is having beauty like what I have got," which because they set it up at the start of the thing in the living room. Glenda Jackson comes in and is quite amusing, and they explain that they've Ernie's rewritten Antony and Cleopatra because Shakespeare didn't do a particularly good job. And it all leads, so they're kind of rehearsing her, and Ernie reads this line out, and she's just horrified by this. Like, it's clearly the worst line, and she tries to phone her agent. So, but what people forget is actually the first thing Glenda Jackson says in the sketch. She comes on with her assistant, a female servant, and literally says, "All men are fools, and what makes them so is having beauty like what I have got." And it gets half a laugh, and you think, okay, that's that dealt with. And then Ernie plays her erstwhile wooer, and his her servant says, I can't remember what character it was, but he's Octavian, I think. He's here to see you. He loves you terribly. She says, "Yeah, I know. I found that out last night." Which is like, and then so, and it's got every sort of Egyptian stereotype you like. And she says, I think we're being watched. And he says, "No, you're being paranoid." So they open the curtains, and there's Eric as the face of the Sphinx looking through the window, which is a really funny visual gag. And then Eric comes in and says, "I have a meet." It's a line that makes me laugh every time. I've got a message for you from Julius and Caesar. And she says, "Julius and Caesar?" And he says, "Yes, he's had an accident with his sword," which is just a great. But it's just full of great. And there's one bit. It's the way she does it. There's one bit where. So it all leads up. So Ern's trying to find out. Eric's trying to find out what's happening between Cleopatra and. So he pretends. She says, like, "Leave me alone with him. I'll find out." And she's flirting with Eric. And there's a line. She's just so disgusted with herself for having to say it because it's such terrible. She says to Eric, "Are you okay? Your heart is pounding like a whippet in a bowler hat," right? Which is just it's the way she delivers it, knowing it's a terrible line, but knowing it's also it's meant to be Antony and Cleopatra, and she's talking about a whippet in a bowler hat. And then of course you've got the classic 3 minutes where she and Ernie, she calls Ernie over and says, like, we have to deal with this. Just leave me alone with him because he's got. And meanwhile, Eric is with the bust, the head, and the head starts looking from one to the other. And then she does the line again. "All men are fools, and what makes them so is having beauty like what I have got." And I think it's probably, I love Shakespeare. I've been to see a lot of. I think it's probably the most perfect delivery of any line in any comedy sketch ever. It's the way the contempt with which she delivers it. But then 15 seconds later, she's trying so hard not to laugh. And Eric's trying so hard to make her laugh. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful. I'm trying to think of another word for joyous because I keep using it, but you can see her. And you can almost see all these thoughts going, "I'm a serious actress. This is what's happened," but then she can't stop herself. and Eric wins, and she starts laughing. But it's got all sorts of other silly jokes. Like they go into the sand dance, the Wilson, Keppel and Betty thing that you mentioned earlier on. Eric's slippers, his curly slippers uncurl when she kisses him, and there's like for me, it's just everything Morecambe and Wise comes together in that sketch. The cleverness of the writing, the silliness of the physical jokes, the sheer enjoyment they're having, the looks to camera, the references to football, the fact that for some reason he's got a Busby hat on, for a 19th century cavalry of the fact that you've got this wonderful actress who's just gritting her teeth and getting through it. I can watch it 5 times a night. If it's wonderful for me. I can't see why anybody wouldn't love it. I remember the first time I was showing it to Ed, and him just 7 or 8, him just getting it and understanding it, and it's just. And I've fell in love. I've been in love with Glenda Jackson for the rest of my life because of that. Because she just gives herself up to it, and she turns up again on other things where Eric rewrites Hamlet and tries to get about to do the to be or not to do speech, and it's like I'm almost getting emotional, but it's just like it's just for me represents something very special in British comedy because it encapsulates so many elements of British comedy that have gone before it, and I can understand why an American or a Dutch person wouldn't get it. Because it is peculiarly English. It's very English, but there is an English legacy of humour. And for me, that just, it takes 100 years of English humour that has gone before it. It takes everything that Eric and Ernie loved about musical, about slapstick, about film, and it just puts it all together in one perfect 12-minute package.
Do you get emotional because... Going back to, I'm going to put in a Marvelism here. The Marvel, the multiverse timeline. You are on that comedy timeline. So is that one reason that it makes you emotional? Because you are. It starts with Morecambe and Wise, but as it goes through, you're on that particular timeline. Does that make it? Is that one reason it makes you emotional?
Do you know what? That's a really good question. And I'm not implying that you haven't asked really good questions at all, but that is generally a really good.
One a podcast is good for me. That's fine.
I'm exceptionally proud of being a comedian and being part. Somebody once said to me, "Oh, you'll be a footnote in the history of British comedy," and I was like, "I'll take that. I'll take
Absolutely.
being a footnote in the history of British comedy." And I've worked with Bob Monkhouse and Dave Allen, and I'm very proud of that. So maybe there is an element of that. You know, I'm very proud to be even a small part of that. I think the emotional is it's definitely not to do with family, because like I say, that would be a false memory if I like, oh, it brings back happy memories of sitting around the open fire. But I think it's more to do with the fact that I think comedy is a very important art form. I think comedy is art as much as painting, photography, music is. And I think it's more the fact that I get emotional because I can point to that sketch and say, if you don't believe me, watch that.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's because for me, making people laugh is a very noble profession. And I genuinely believe that you can talk about any subject, no matter how serious, as long as you make it funny. And you know, when people go into theatres or comedy, it says comedy outside, so your duty is to make people laugh. And I think making people laugh is a noble calling. And I love making people laugh. And sometimes, you know, Simon Mayo once said to me, you need to get away from the tyranny of laughter. You're an intelligent person, you can talk about stuff, but you need to stop looking for the punchline. Sometimes it's enough to say something that's interesting, but it's very difficult because you want to make people laugh because it's the only way you validate yourself. And Eric and Ernie, all they wanted to do was make people laugh, and for me that's a really important thing. And for me, I mean, God forbid I should have anywhere near as much talent as those two had, but there is something about them where, like I say, all these important elements of English, and it's English. It's not even British, really, because Scottish humour, Irish humour, Welsh humour is different. It's English working class comedy, and it all comes together in that moment. And I'm very proud that later on I became part of English working class comedy as well. But that is an interesting question, one I will give thought to, definitely. So.
And talking personally, we're obviously a different level from yourself. If I say something that makes you laugh, Kevin, I tend to think I feel good because you are a professional comedian. And if you find something that either myself or Neil finds funny, I kind of think, wow, that actually makes me feel really good.
It's actually very difficult to make comedians laugh because we make the worst audience.
Yeah, I can
because
imagine.
No, seriously, it's like because you're constantly trying to. If I sit down and watch a comedian, you're constantly trying to second guess what they're going to do.
Right.
Or you're constantly thinking, right, okay, this is what I would have said, and in your mind you might be going, oh, that's great, that's funny. It's like you'll go and see it. I'll go and see an Edinburgh show, and I'll go to somebody else. Oh, that was brilliant. I say, you didn't fucking crack a lot. You didn't smile. It was like, but no, I love it. But I genuinely enjoy. I've spontaneously laughed a lot tonight, which is unusual for a comedian because it's a cliche. But the sad clown thing is a cliche. But most comics are very serious about what they do, and that's the genius, I think, of Eric and Ernie is that, and it comes back to the Andre Previn thing. Nothing that Eric and Ernie do looks like it's rehearsed.
No.
And the reason it doesn't look like it's rehearsed is because they've rehearsed it for 4 weeks.
Exactly.
Basically, to give them the confidence to go on and do it. And that's the best. I always I don't trust comics who say they don't get nervous before a gig. I don't trust comics who say they don't analyse. My son did a show last night, a preview for his tour, and he came home and said, like, how was it? He went, well, I wasn't that happy, but everyone else seemed to like it. And that's the default setting of the good comedian, I think, because you're always looking for, and Eric and Ernie talk about, especially the Christmas thing. Eddie Braben talks about the pressure of the Christmas show. Eddie Braben would start writing or thinking about the next Christmas show in January because they knew how important it was to people. And Eric and Ernie would watch the Christmas show on their own, basically, really, really nervous, and then phone each other up and say, how was it? And then because they understood how important it was to people, almost some people's Christmas was being made or broken by, and it's so to be able to entertain the whole nation is such a difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
To be able to, famously the royal family would stop and watch the Morecambe and Wise Christmas special in the same way as a working class family in Glasgow or Cornwall would. So to have that pressure is astonishing. But yeah, I just get emotional because to me they just represent something that I think is really important, and it's like, and that is making people laugh.
Yeah,
essentially.
Completely agree. Okay, so Neil, we both had Andre Previn. Do you have any more to say about that? Or
I think we've covered it beautifully.
I think we pretty much did. Let's go on to the honourable mentions. At Martin_FGC said the Andre Previn sketch. At running_Neil said my choice has already been taken, as in the Andre Previn. Another one I love is the kitchen sketch to the stripper theme. Yeah. At Russell Mark 333, the breakfast routine to the stripper music, with the added bonus of a mention of the great Malcolm Allison at the start.
Yeah. I saw it, I saw that. Which of course,
yeah.
It was
and the Beatles, You've Only Got a Little Dad, haven't you? There you go. That's what we mentioned earlier on. At Johnny Edwards 771 said everything they ever did are my top moments. At Lion on Sea, I love everything about Morecambe and Wise, but the Andre Previn sketch was one of the funniest things I've ever seen. At Genetian61 said Grieg by Him and Mr. Preview. Yeah. The Stripper Breakfast, Singing in the Rain, Glenda as Cleopatra, Lord Erne of Peterborough, Tom Jones and his backing singers, Des O'Connor, Angela Rippon, Shirley Bassey, and the Set Builders, and Penelope Keith on the Staircase are 10 of the best. At Doors...
sorry to interrupt. I was just say that Lord Erne of Peterborough thing again. there are so many of those little moments when they're on stage together for just 2 minutes. You could have done a special just with those, but all these traits that Eddie Braben made up for Ernie, that he was tight with money, that he had a toupee, that he had short, fat, hairy legs, all that stuff. That Eric clearly loved doing, and that whole Lord Ern of Peterborough thing. And it's really odd because even though Eric lived near Luton, his character clearly thought that the fact that Ernie lived in Peterborough was hilarious.
Yeah.
You know, and Ernie Wise bought into that. So again, all those little things added to the whole of the show. You know,
and the character,
so different, the character and the mechanics and the callbacks and the
Absolutely. At Dorset Rainbow, anything with Des O'Connor, my husband would say to mention Luton Town FC up the Hatters. At Broken Sword, all the above, and the Morney Stanett newspaper vendor.
Oh, that's a really good one.
I don't know what that one is.
Yeah, it was. I think it was Evening Stanett rather than Morning Stanett.
Ah, right.
I think it's Ernie selling newspapers. It might be Morning Stanett. It's Ernie selling, Eric selling newspapers outside a railway station, and Ernie's in like a top hat, a bowler hat, and obviously a commuter. And Eric's going, "Evening Stanett, evening Stanett." Old the and Ernie goes, "No, evening Standard, evening Standard." So over the course of 2 minutes, he teaches Eric to say it correctly, and ends up with Eric going, "Evening Standard, evening Standard." And Ernie goes, "There you are." And as Ernie walks off, Eric holds the paper up, and it's called the Evening Stanett. So it's a really good. I think it seems that way. It might be, but that's a really good choice. That's a great choice.
There you go. I hadn't seen that one.
Choice.
Okay. Phil James says he's not going to sell many ice creams going at that speed. Who needs a whole sketch when you have that perfect delivery of one line? Mary Walker James said, "I had a little dinky once." You still have.
Yeah.
Paul Osgood with Andre Previn playing all the right notes, not necessarily in the right order. Mark Kempner, Eric, they all say that. I'm not quite sure what that one is.
That's one of Eric's stock
things. Yeah,
very good.
Adrian Marsh, there's so many. The Kitchen Breakfast, the Newsreaders Dance, Andre Previn, Shirley Bass's song, Singing in the Rain. Definitely one act I wish I'd gotten to see live. And Laura Bourne, the breakfast sketch to the stripper is surely the most iconic. I've seen it a million times, but still always laugh.
Yeah. I live near Croydon, Fairfield Halls, and there's one of the few records of their live gigs is like a 5-minute. Somebody filmed it with a cine camera, then performing at Fairfield Halls, which is brilliant. But the first time I performed there, one of the stewards got talking to him. He was a steward that night at that gig, and he just said, "I can't begin to explain to you how." He said just the hubbub in the audience before the show started. And he said it's just amazing. So they did about 4 encores, and the audience, he said, just the love and the affection. But I also remember I did a show about 15 years ago in studios in Southampton. I can't remember the show. I've done a lot of terrible mortgage paying stuff in the past. But I did this particular show, and I was rehearsing something, and one of the cameramen just went, because this is what camera crew are like, basically. They're like football groundsmen, bass players, football groundsmen, camera crew, just grumpy bloody. He just said to me, "You won't make me laugh, mate. I filmed Morecambe and Wise."
Oh, so right.
I went, "So are you saying I'm as funny as Morecambe and Wise?" He went, No, I'm saying the opposite. So it's just that people, and those responses you've read out there, people use Morecambe and Wise as a standard to compare.
Yeah, they really do. Yeah,
other people too, actually.
Absolutely do. Well, there you go. We've done it. This will be the end of part 2 of the Morecambe and Wise top 10.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've done it. So
That's your way of saying I spoke too much again.
No.
It's been
honestly, Kevin, it means that we get an extra episode out of it, which is great. I love it.
Yeah, it's been fascinating.
That's the thing is we get to. I mean, there's stuff that we found out tonight that would never have known. I'd never have known stuff that you've heard from Barry Cryer and legends like that. So, and you're also, like I say, you are on that timeline of British comedy. So it's a great privilege and a for us to be able to talk to you about these kind of things.
It's one of the only times I saw Barry Cryer upset. I loved Barry. I was so upset to hear his part. He was just so generous and so supportive. But there was a TV drama a few years back about Eddie Braben and Morecambe and Wise. Basically, I think Stephen Tonkinson played Eddie Braben. It was very good, but Barry got really upset because they showed a scene famously when Eric had his first heart attack, and he went. I think it was might have been the first BBC. So Eric realised that the audience might be a bit worried about his health. So when they went on, when they got introduced, Eric just went, "Keep going, you fool," which is like got a big laugh. But Barry was the warm-up man. Barry did the warm-up, I'd say, for most of their BBC shows. And on this drama show, Eric decides to go on and say that to the audience because the warm-up man, who they don't name as Barry, the warm-up man is dying on his arse. And Eric and Ernie are going, "This is terrible. We can't, we have to do something about this." And Barry was really upset because he was a valued member of the Morecambe and Wise team, and never died on his arse. And he took that as a real slur.
I can imagine
on his thing. But how can you not be excited to sit at Barry Cryer's table and hear him talk about being the warm-up man for Eric and Ernie, and hear him talk about how they worked together and how they used to get involved? It's and that's one of the reasons I like my respect for Eric and Ernie is so high, is because somebody like Barry, who's an idol of mine, just speaks of them with the highest of praise, and also speaks about what nice people they were as well.
Yeah.
What genuinely decent people they were. Yeah.
Well,
fantastic.
Talking of genuinely decent and nice people, Kevin.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's been
educating us.
An absolute pleasure.
Well, I will say what I said last time. It's really nice to do a pod where people are so enthusiastic and excited about their subject matter, and also take the time. You're doing a different top 10 every week, so taking the time to learn about, do your own research.
Yeah, even if the questions were something that you both came across with,
In fact, I like this pod so much. I'm going to half-heartedly promise one day, when you do your top 10 Avengers thing, I'll happily do some sort of cameo role. Neil can teach me something to drop in.
Yeah. But I mean, I think Laurel and Hardy is definitely something that should be in our future in the new year, without a shadow of a doubt.
I would love to do that, because I'll need to find another word for joyful, obviously, before then, because
that may be a trilogy, that episode.
Yeah.
Frank Skinner always talked about the fact that when he started going out with a new girlfriend, he would take them home and show them Lauren Hardy's The Way Out West soft shoe number. And if the girlfriend didn't laugh, he just would end the relationship there and then, basically. So we clearly can't continue with it.
That would be fun. That would be a lot of fun.
I'd love to do that, of course.
Give me an excuse to watch them all back to back again.
Absolutely. Before we actually say our proper goodbyes, Neil, do you want to tell everybody how they can get in touch with us and all the gubbins?
Absolutely. So you can find us on all the gubbins. There you are.
Thank you.
You can find us on all the social media at Top 10 Pods. Email us at top10pods@hotmail.com with any questions, any ideas. Come out, support the podcast at patreon.com/top10pods. And please do come and subscribe. Leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever else you get your podcast from.
And also, don't forget to tune in. Do they say that these days? Tune in to Kevin and Kieran Maguire's fantastic Price of Football podcast. The link is in the show notes. And you've got a book as well, haven't you? I'll put that link in the show notes as well.
We have, it came out last week. It's the book of the podcast. I feel honor bound to mention that we are the Radio Times Sports Podcast of the Year.
Well, there you go.
Fantastic.
Such is the demographic of the Radio Times readers that we are the third oldest people nominated for a prize. Yes, our book, the Price of Football book, An Idiot's Guide to Owning a Football Club, is out now. So
There you go. So you can get that. Just click on the link in the show notes, and you'll be able to get yourself a copy of that as well. And then, Kevin, don't forget to get onto eBay straight away and get your copy of the Morecambe and Wise Annual from 1977.
I feel slightly grubby publicising the book now because it feels like this whole 3.5 hour exercise has been leading up to a cheap plug for the book.
To be fair, I offered that out. You didn't offer it to me. I offered it to you. So
yeah, I'm not sure what the Morecambe and Wise football finance crossover is in the Venn diagram, but there'll be some people out there.
Luton Town, surely. It just
there you
go.
There you go. What a note to end on.
What a note to end on. So there you go, everybody. Oh, before we do go, I just have to say a big welcome to Paul Duffus and Shannon Barrett, our new 2 Patreon top heads.
Oh,
so thank you, Paul, and thank you, Shannon, for your support.
Yes.
You literally keep the lights on, so thank you ever so much for your support. And once again, Kevin, it's been an absolute honour and a pleasure to have you with us.
I loved every minute. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Neil.
Thank you very much, Pat. Thank you very much, Kevin. Always a joy. Always educational.
Indeed, it is. Thank you very much, everybody, for watching and listening. And let's go start the countdown.
10, 9,